Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Luffy's Different Mama AU by FunahoMisaki. What if, instead of Big Mom, or some random Marine or revolutionary, or even another random pirate, Luffy's mother was someone else? Was one of Big Mom's children, who was broken when he was taken from her by his father. Now that they know who he is, his mother, grandmother, and aunts and uncles will stop at nothing to get him back and keep him safe. Big shout out to the warlords of this channel: Roderius Jones, Native Warrior, Claude Lifrace, Neoisker 23, Derek Dowdy, Zazu Sayaz, Abdul Raf Ali, N3WT, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Case Clark, KSGPL4YZ, Brian McKenzie. You know who you are. Want to stand with them? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
Big Mom was enjoying her snack and waiting on the report she had ordered of Monkey D. Luffy's family. That ballsy brat had claimed to have eaten all of her candy from Fishman Island, and then said he would defeat her. Now, despite what most of the world thought, including some of her own subjects she knew, Big Mom was not easy to anger most of the time. A child like Luffy boasting big, she was used to hearing it. Honestly, he wouldn't be the first to try and fight her, and he won't be the last, she was certain. Besides, she has 85 children that she raised from birth until now. She was more than used to hearing them boast that they were going to be stronger than her back when they were younger, especially her boys. She never really took offense to someone claiming that they were going to kick her ass. Honestly, she has heard it hundreds of times before, so why would she? What pissed her off the most about the brat was the obvious lie to her about how he had eaten all of her Fishman candy and that he had the missing member of the Vinsmokes that she was going to arrange for her beloved Pudding to marry on his crew. While she never truly favored one child over the other, although she found it impossible to look at and interact with her daughter Chiffon without flying into a rage thanks to her twin sister Lola's desertion, she did admit that she spoiled Pudding more than the others and gave her more attention. Thanks to her third eye giving her the ability to read poneglyphs, the very few who somehow found out about this ability and knew about the red poneglyph in her possession, often tried to kidnap or kill Pudding. Especially back when she had been a baby. Dolce, Draghi, what have I told you about pulling Inanna's hair? The voice of one of her elder children, Brûlé, her beautiful broken inside 8th daughter, demanded, snapping Big Mom out of her thoughts and drawing her gaze from the small by comparison pastry in her hand to some of her younger children. Brûlé, the proud but scarred mirror user, was holding little Inanna, her 37th daughter and a true little terror in the making, on one rather bony hip and was reprimanding the twins who were holding the remains from their balloons now and looking a bit miserable. Judging by the mirror shards, it was obvious that Brûlé had popped the boys' balloons this time instead of Inanna herself, probably for pulling their sister's hair. But Brûlé, she's a psychopath, the twins protested in unison, like they so often did, and making Inanna look upset with tears in her eyes and the older siblings to wince since they knew what that word did to their sister and they didn't mean the little one. What have I said about calling her that? Brûlé demanded, looking furious and disappointed with the two boys, and Big Mom as well as some of the older children knew why. Brûlé had been interested in a rather good-looking and wealthy son of a noble back when she had been 16, but the boy had turned out to be a true sociopath and psychopath and kept it hidden for a few years. The day before the two of them were to be married on Brûlé's 21st birthday, the boy had snapped and tried to kill his fiancée. He had cut off Brûlé's nose and gave her a horrible scar that went diagonally across her face, just barely missing her left eye. It had only been thanks to luck and her siblings wanting to see their sister one last time before she was married that they had been able to get to her before she bled out, and managed to reattach her nose despite the fact that it was discolored now. He had mutilated one of her babies and nearly killed her the day before she married him. It was supposed to have been the happiest day of her daughter's life, and yet it ended up being one of the darkest. Perospero had been the one to get there first and had surprised most of them when his calm if not slightly unhinged personality went full on protective fiery rage on the one who had dared to harm one of his baby sisters. It had taken Big Mom, who had been holding back greatly lest she risk crippling or even killing her eldest son, Several dozen chess peacekeepers, Compote, and the triplets, Compote, Kakuri, Oven, and Daifuku were only assisting on their mother's orders and even then didn't give it their all, and she couldn't blame them, to keep the eldest child from outright killing his sister's attacker. He had been very pissed when he had been stopped and had stayed that way for over an hour, right up until Big Mom told him that she was sure all of Brulee's siblings wanted to show their disappointment in his actions to the man himself. Once the siblings were done, but left the S-bag alive on their mother's orders, Big Mom drained his soul slowly over the course of weeks to months until Brulee was finally recovered enough physically, emotionally, and mentally to see the man again. She had been jittery, nervous, even outright scared, but she had done it with her two favorite big brothers standing beside her for support. Big Mom had left just enough of the man's soul in his body for him to be alive and knowing full well who had finally ended his misery and killed him. Brulee had even been gracious, or cruel as some would say, enough to have used the very same knife her former fiancé had used to slash her face open and nearly blinded her in one eye. They had never really told her that while the rest of the siblings old enough to take part tortured the man who had dared harm one of theirs, Amanda and Perispero had been in such a towering rage that just torturing the man hadn't quailed their fury and desire for blood. To keep them from accidentally finishing the job that was Brulee's right to finish, Big Mom had given the two of them a new mission. Destroy that noble son's family and kingdom and make it part of their own as payment for the damage done to her daughter. By the time the two were done, they were covered in blood and hadn't left a single one of the man's family members or those who tried to stop him alive. Sorry Brunei, the twins said, looking shamefaced and upset once Brulee finally was done reaming them both a new one for what they had called their younger sister and how they had been treating her. None of the youngest siblings liked the eighth sister being upset or mad at them. Am I a psychopath? Inanna asked quietly, looking up at her favorite big sister scared and tearfully. Brulee immediately began bouncing the little girl and rocking on her feet slightly as everyone watched. Not that the eighth daughter cared in the least as she focused on the child in her arms. No sweetheart, you're nowhere near being a psychopath. You're just a little bit sadistic, or perhaps a little more twisted in the mind than some of the rest of us, but that's okay. We're all twisted in our own ways and some more than others. So would you like to cut things or pop their balloons? Maybe that means you'll take an interest in swordsmanship or at least knife wielding as your fighting style. Or maybe you'll be more interested in being in the medical field like a surgeon. Brulee quickly began to softly soothe her little sister. Well, one of the littlest ones that is. Despite being vain and arrogant around outsiders, seeming as if she only wanted to carve up every pretty face she met, she was actually very gentle and understanding with her siblings. All of the Charlotte siblings from 9th to 85th looked up to and had a bit of a soft spot for the 8th daughter. Some of the littlest ones like Inanna even saw her as a second mama. Katakuri may be the favorite big brother, and Compote may be the eldest sister, but Brulee was the favorite big sister. Oftentimes she had used her mirror powers to check on and keep an eye on her siblings, who all had small mirrors in their possession at all times. And all of her siblings and even her mother knew that if they needed her to be there and simply said her name into a mirror, then she'd hear them and be there in less than a minute. Surgeons have to cut people up to fix them. Maybe that's what you'd be into when you're older. But for now it's too early to tell. And cutting things. Then you keep cutting things but don't kill anyone or anything living until you're at least 13, alright? Brulee asked, bouncing her sister a bit more and earning a small smile and a nod from one of the youngest three girls in the family. MK. Inanna said, cuddling close to her favorite big sister, making Brulee smile warmly at Inanna while Big Mom smiled fondly at her daughters. You'll make a very good mother one day, Brulee. Big Mom said, not for the first time, making Brulee's eyes widen and she blushed brightly as she looked away from everyone. But they all saw the small sad smile on her face, even as her reaction caused them all to laugh a bit except for a few who looked guilty. She was so easily flustered by compliments. Even back before she had been scarred, she had been easy to fluster. Sometimes her siblings would say different things or compliments just to watch their clumsy, ticklish, broken sister blush bright red and flounder about a bit. It was one of the less damaging but still a bit sadistic things the siblings liked to do. Sadistic according to their targeted sister, of course. Brulee has cursed her siblings out more than once when the younger ones couldn't hear for it while stumbling over her feet in embarrassment. Mama, Tamago came rushing into the room as fast as he could, only ending up crashing into Brulee. The two of them went down in a swirl of growls, yelps, and curses while the rest of the Charlotte siblings in attendance either busted out laughing, or tried to hide the fact that they were laughing. Leave it to their clumsy accident-prone sister to have that happen to her, although it seemed her observation hockey was getting a bit stronger. Not many of her siblings had noticed it, but Big Mom and the older siblings had. Just before Tamago had entered the room, Brûlée stopped blushing as she looked at the door and quickly but carefully tossed a nana to the closest sibling who would catch her. In this case it was Amande, the third-born daughter, who had reacted in a surprisingly fast pace and caught the tossed girl in her arms. Tamago, you have 5 seconds to separate yourself from Brûlée, and 3 to tell me why you were in such a hurry that you disturbed my time with my children. Big Mom said, glaring at Tamago, who hastily scrambled off of Brûlée and away from the tall woman. Big Mom didn't often spend a lot of time with her family all together unless it was a tea party, and even then most of the time a few of her children couldn't make it due to attacking pirates and other such things. When she did spend time with all of her children, even though Katakuri was away at the moment retrieving a present for Brûlée's birthday next week, she guarded it fiercely and jealously. Tamago had been in service to the Charlotte family for a long time, since a year or so before Brûlée's ex-fiancé tried to kill her. In fact, he knew that although they didn't often show it openly, especially around others, most of the Charlotte siblings numbers 16 and up were very protective of the 8th sister, to the point where some of them seemed to have a sister complex of sorts. The younger siblings were a bit protective too and very possessive, but they were that protective over all of their loyal siblings. The older ones were more protective of their broken sister than they were their other siblings. The information you asked for, on Straw Hat Luffy's family? Tamago panted out, making everyone pause for a moment and look at him while Big Mom's eyes narrowed and Smoothie helped her sister up with a small smile while Brûlée scowled at her siblings who were still chuckling or giggling at her. Hurry up and spit it out, Big Mom said, even as she had picked up her youngest daughter to sit on her lap when the little blonde girl held her arms up towards her mother. Big Mom smiled softly down at her youngest as she handed the girl a small tea cake that was about the same size as the child's head. But the little girl had her mother's appetite as she devoured it in less than a minute. His father, like they said at the War of Best, it wasn't a lie to aim the Marines at him. Tamago hurried to rush out while Big Mom looked at him annoyed a bit. Why should she care about the damn war? All she cared about was the fact that Whitebeard had died during it, which had left Fishman Island ripe for the taking, and took it she had. They had delivered the sweets on time ever since she claimed the island. Right up until that damn Straw Hat had the gall to claim he had. His father is Monkey D. Dragon, the leader of the revolutionaries, Tamago said, causing most of the elder children to jerk slightly as they stared in shock, a few turning towards Brûlée, who was frozen at that. Damn Straw Hat, Dragon. Everyone could tell when the information processed in Big Mom's mind as her eyes slowly widened, her mouth dropped open a little bit as her gaze swung towards Brûlée in an instant. Dragon, but wasn't that? Smoothie trailed off, staring wide-eyed at her siblings that had been old enough to remember when the man had visited their home. The one who stole our nephew. Oven said, his face set into a scowl as the floor heated up slightly underneath his feet at the reminder. That was one of his only and worst failures. Being unable to protect his newborn nephew and keep his sister from breaking. Stole our nephew? Anglias, the youngest son, asked, confused as he looked at his elder siblings. As far as the younger ones knew, there weren't any nephews other than Chiffon's newborn son with her husband Big Monkey D. Dragon. Almost 20 years ago he had shipwrecked on our island. Brûlée was the one to find him in the remains of his ship and bring him here for medical assistance. The doctors said that Brûlée saved his life by doing that. Daifuku said, scowling darkly as well, although most of the older siblings and Big Mom herself were looking at Brûlée in worry. The mirror woman was still frozen in place, wide-eyed. Over the course of a few months Brûlée had fallen for him, and it seemed he had fallen for her as well, and thus Mama allowed them to be married. He wasn't bothered by her scar. In fact, he had said it just made her look better since it meant she was strong enough to survive. The man said softly, looking at her younger sister in worry even as she set Anana down on her own feet. But then he left. He left all of a sudden and abandoned us. Because of something to do with the revolutionaries. He promised he'd be here by my side, especially right then, but he just up and left without a single word. Brûlée said, clenching her eyes shut tightly as she tried to fight back the memories. The memories of the man who she had fallen for, even though she really should have known better after her first attempt at love backfired so horribly. Not just that, but when he had come back, it was only so that he could steal his newborn son, Brulee's newborn son, right from the cradle. He stole your nephew, Brulee's son, and my grandson and then vanished off the face of the earth before we could find him and get the baby back. Big Mom scowled darkly at that, her powers beginning to surround her in a miasma of rage. Brulee would have been a great mother. She had been looking forward to the baby so eagerly even after Dragon had left. She had been so happy to have a baby of her own to love and care for like she did her little siblings. Tamago, find out all information you can on Monkey D. Luffy immediately and then fetch Katakuri, Big Mom ordered, making the man run from the room immediately. Don't worry sis. We'll get your baby boy back and welcome him to the family with open arms. Compote was trying to reassure and soothe her younger sister, who still had her eyes screwed shut and her arms wrapped around her own stomach where her scar was hidden by her dress. Brulee had been very thin even while pregnant, dangerously so. They had to cut open her stomach to get the baby out so that both of them had survived the birthing. You should be proud of your son Brulee. The Charlotte blood seems to run strong. Eyes softly to her mirror daughter, who looked up at her confused and with tears in her eyes, causing her siblings and mother to be upset. They never liked seeing one of their own cry, especially not a strong if not clumsy woman like Brulee. He's only 19 at the moment and he already has a 300 million berry bounty. I think that's a record for our family, isn't it? Amanda asked, looking at the others who tried thinking about it for a moment. They weren't sure what all of their siblings' bounties were at the age of 19, but their nephew's bounty did beat most of theirs at that age. Although since he's a member of the Charlotte family, then maybe he really did eat all of that candy from Fishman Island. Big Mom said thoughtfully and making Brulee snicker a bit, although it was kind of watery. She was obviously trying not to break down in front of everyone. She busted out in hysterical watery laughter at Parasparrow's next sentence then. Looks like our nephew has a sweet tooth then. He'll fit in just fine. Tamago, what have you found out about my grandson? Big Mom asked, looking at the now sweating man a day or two later. Katakuri had gotten back to the Chachu a few hours after they had learned about Luffy's family and immediately began tracking down the Straw Hats when he learned about how Luffy was the nephew he hadn't been able to find. He was going to track down his nephew and bring him back. If he was fast, then he could have the boy back in time for Brulee's birthday. It would be the one thing his sister actually wanted for her birthday for the last 19 years, and he was considered the best big brother in the family for a reason. Well, tell me, Brulee said, glaring holes in Tamago's head as she stared at him with such intensity that if she had a heat-based devil fruit he'd be nothing but ashes. Patience, Brulee. Tamago was just about to start the reports. Parasparrow said, making his sister take a deep breath and calm herself down so that she wasn't as frantic as she has been for the last day or so. Ever since finding out her son was still alive, she had been rather on edge. It seems he was raised in the East Blue, in the Goa Kingdom. Working on the exact island now. Tamago said, making everyone look surprised. Such a strong pirate for being from the weakest sea. Cracker said, making Big Mom grin. He's a Charlotte. Even more, he's Brulee's son. Brulee is one of the strongest of you girls. Big Mom said, making Brulee blush brightly but smiles slightly at the compliment from her mother. Her mother rarely gave out compliments. It seems that at the age of 17, shortly after setting sail, he had defeated most all of the major pirates from the East Blue with suffering little to no injury. This list includes Alvida the Iron Mace, Buggy the Clown, who is now a warlord, Foldplay Krieg, and Arlong the Fishman. Without the use of hockey. Tamago said, making everyone pause for a moment. No matter how you look at it, that is a bit impressive. Fishmen are naturally stronger than most humans physically. Cinnamon said, a bit impressed at the feat. For New World-raised pirates to do so, it was only a little impressive, but considering that even though he was born in the New World, he was raised in the weakest sea, it was incredibly impressive. It also seems that his first mate, pirate hunter Zoro, has faced Mihawk in battle while in the East Blue and survived a direct attack from the Black Blade. Tamago said, next earning an impressed look from a man who was one of the best sword users out of her siblings. To survive a slash from that blade, that's rare. Amanda said, her hand resting on the hilt of her own famous sword. A present from her mama for her 20th birthday after she had bested the kingdom's best swordsman with her practice sword. Mama. I'd expect no less from my grandson's first mate, Big Mom laughed, impressed herself at the fact that some no-name brat from the weakest sea had survived Mahawk, even if the warlord hadn't been fighting seriously. The only other thing of note that happened in East Blue would be when the Straw Hats were at Logia Town before entering the Grand Line through the Reverse Mountain. Tamago said, looking more nervous than ever now as he glanced warily at Brûlé. The Mirror Woman was vastly overprotective of her siblings. How protective would she be of her son? Why do I have the feeling I'm not going to like this? Brûlé asked, narrowing her eyes at Tamago's worried look. It seems that while in Logia Town, Buggy and Alvida joined together their crews in an alliance to execute Straw Hat Luffy. One of our spies was on scene when it happened, and he reported that Straw Hat was caught unaware from behind while on the execution stand and cuffed with sea stone. They were planning to execute him via decapitation in the same spot goal. D. Roger had been executed. Tamago said, backing away slowly, and no one could blame him. What? Brûlé demanded with a screech, standing and making the mirrors in the room begin to tremble as they reacted to their mistress's fury. Obviously it didn't work. Brûlé, calm down and let Tamago finish the report. Compote barked as she felt her sister's powers begin to activate and surge. Now most thought that the mirror fruit wasn't good for anything but spying and ambush tactics, but they forgot something important. A mirror shows a reflection of what's in front of it. Brûlé had access to mirrors around the world and could reflect anyone she wanted to and their powers at a moment's notice. Sister breath. Amanda said slowly as she placed a hand on her younger sister's shoulder and gently pushed her back down into the chair while Smoothie quickly forced a glass of grapefruit juice, Brûlé's favorite drink of choice, into her sister's hand. What happened to Tamago? Did his crew get him free? Big Mom barked the questions at the man who quickly scrambled for the papers. Actually, while our spy reported that Vinsmoke, Sanji and Pirate Hunter had arrived on scene and were making their way to try and rescue their captain after he had yelled how he would be the king of pirates. Tamago said before a low whistle interrupted him. Kids got balls of steel to say something like that in the same spot Roger was executed. Oven said with a small smirk as some of his siblings nodded in agreement. They wouldn't have made it in time since they did not know any ranged moves at the time the incident occurred. Tamago said finally, and knew it was the wrong thing to say as the mirrors in the room began trembling harder while Brûlé was visibly fighting to stay in her seat. Our spy said that as Buggy was bringing the sword down on Straw Hat, he witnessed something he had only seen once before, and couldn't believe it. Tamago said, nervously stepping further away from Brûlé. Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Nami, sorry but, I'm dead. Those were Luffy's last words before he grinned happily. Tamago said, making Brûlé go ashen white as she nearly went boneless in her seat, her eyes wide. She could have lost him. She could have lost her baby boy before he even entered the Grand Line, all because of an arrogant brat and her son's incompetent crew. And her son would have been happy with that. The blade was just above his neck when the largest recorded strike of lightning in the area struck the platform and burnt it while also making it collapse to the ground. Tamago said, causing Brûlé to go even paler. Her son had been struck by lightning? How badly had he been injured? Citron asked, pale as well. Seriously, was her nephew a trouble magnet or what? That's where it gets surprising. According to our spy, Straw Hat Luffy stood up and laughed completely fine after the platform collapsed. I believe our spy recalled him saying, "I'm still alive, that's nice," before he took off away from the scene. Tamago said, making more than a few of the siblings look shocked and gape in disbelief. Even Big Mom was surprised by this. How? Most of us would be gravely injured if not killed by such a thing, so how did he survive that? Cinnamon asked, staring at Tamago in shock and disbelief. It seems he had eaten a devil fruit by accident when he was a child. My best guess is that his devil fruit renders him immune to lightning. Tamago said, quickly flipping through the reports. According to this, he is also immune to blunt damage such as clubs or punches that aren't infused with hockey, as well as any projectiles that aren't bladed or made of sea stone. Regular bullets, quite literally, bounce off of him without leaving a mark. Tamago said, quickly finding that part of the report and making the siblings, except for Brûlé who was closing her eyes and trying to calm down her breathing, to exchange wide-eyed looks. What devil fruit did he eat? A logia of some type? Big Mom asked, just as surprised as her children but doing a much better job of hiding it. No. He ate a paramecia-class fruit. Tamago said, making all of them stare at him in disbelief. What kind of paramecia fruit did he eat? Parasparrow asked in disbelief, even aimed candy for her to munch on, which she did with great aggression. He ate the gum-gum fruit. The kid's body is made of rubber. Beeg was the one to say from where he was sitting beside his wife, who was holding their son in her arms. He's a supernova like me. I kept an eye on the kid's abilities in case we ever had to fight. Beeg said when everyone looked at him in curiosity on how he knew that. From the reverse mountain, it seems that he landed on the bounty hunter nest Whiskey Peak. We're not exactly sure what happened, but it seems that Pirate Hunter alone took out all 100 bounty hunters as well as several higher-up agents of Crocodile's Baroque works. An unknown amount of time later, it seems that they had landed on the island of Drum seeking medical help for the navigator cat burglar Nami. Tamago said, quickly hurrying along before Brûlé could react to hearing her son had been in the clutches of bounty hunters. During this, it seems that the king of the island, Wapol, had tried to take his kingdom back even though he had deserted it earlier due to a pirate attacking it. Tamago said, causing most of the Charlotte siblings to scowl in disgust, even the younger ones. He sounds like a coward, Duese and Dulgi said, making the older ones nod. During the ensuing fight, Straw Hat protected a flag that meant a lot to a friend he had made at the time. A doctor from the reports. Straw Hat also ended up dethroning Wapol for good as well as punching a world government-acknowledged king. When they left the island, it was in the company of their pet cotton candy lover Chopper. It says they left with a doctor joining their crew as well, but if they did, then they've managed to keep the doctor away from all fights and from all marines. Tamago said, making Big Mom frown slightly. There's something more to that pet than meets the eye, I'm sure. Perhaps they, the crew, are training it to be a last line of defense guard for their captain. Daifuku was thinking along the same lines as his mother, earning a helpless shrug from Tamago. There are rumors of it being a monster, but there has been no way for our spies to verify it for sure yet. Moving on from there, it seems that the crew then made its way to Alabasta with Princess Vivi in their company and reported to being in great debt to Luffy and his crew. According to our contacts in the kingdom, that was where Luffy met up with his elder brother for the first time since the brother had set off to become a pirate 3 years before Luffy had. Tamago said, making Brûlé jerk slightly in her seat as she glared darkly. Luffy was an only child I would know. Does that mean that Dragon had? Tamago quickly cut off Brûlé before she could get too worked up over it. Reports say that the brother in question is Portagues d'Ace, otherwise known as Gold d'Ace, and had been raised as Luffy's adopted brother. He was the one they had been trying to execute at the War of Best 2 years ago. Tamago reported, making everyone pause for a moment before most of the siblings began paling or looking horrified. But Straw Hat had been there, and if I remember right, then not only did Whitebeard die at the war, but so did Ace himself. Monty Dore said, making the few that hadn't look horrified or pale to look that way now. Luffy had to watch as the one he viewed as his older brother was killed right in front of him. Amand was the one to say what they were all thinking, while Burlee was visibly being restrained by Compote to keep from running to the nearest mirror to find her son. After refusing to join the Whitebeard pirates when Ace offered him to, it's reported that Luffy's crew proceeded to defeat Crocodile's top officers, with Luffy himself fighting Crocodile a total of 3 times. It's said that Luffy lost twice and was saved from death by someone else, although we're unsure who at the moment, before he finally defeated Crocodile the 3rd time just in time to stop the war and save the country's king. Tamago said, making Brûlé struggle harder to get out of Compote's hold while Galette moved to use her powers to help restrain her sister. "Let me go. I'll track Crocodile down and kill him myself," Brûlé shouted at her siblings as a near-maniac glint appeared in her eyes. How dare that man try and kill her son? From there, it seems that they left the kingdom with a new crew member and as allies of the Alabasta royal family and kingdom in general. From what some of our spies in various places managed to gather, Devil's Child Nico Robin had joined the crew after they beat her former boss Crocodile. One spy said that Sanji was heard gripping in a bar a few islands over about how she had said, and I quote, "What he," meaning Luffy, "had done to her was unbearable and he should take responsibility." End quote. Tamago said, making everyone over the age of 15 pause and all of them to slowly turn to stare at Brûlé, who had frozen rather comically at that information. Releasing her hold on her younger sister, Compote had seen the telltale signs of her sister about to go apeshit and wisely backed away while covering her ears. Just in time too, Brulee's screech was heard clear to Nuts Island. "What, my baby boy is already married? Looks like Brulee is a grandmother," Perospero said amused as he watched his sister rage and curse about her boy apparently taking after his father. No, from our reports the unbearable thing he had done was simply saving Robin's life. There are no records or hints of them being more than friends and crewmates, or of Robin having any children, Tamago said, but a particularly violent string of curses from Brulee kept anyone from hearing him. From Alabasta, they have traveled to Jaya where they then went to Skypedia. Tamago managed to call out when Brulee was taking a quick breath from her raging, which distracted everyone. "The mythical land in the clouds?" Inanna asked, making Tamago nod. "Yes, although it's no myth. It seems that while in Skypedia, Luffy ended up fighting against a man named Enel who called himself a god due to being a lightning logia." Tamago quickly flipped pages while Cracker narrowed his eyes. "How badly was he hurt before he fled? He didn't have haki then, did he?" Cracker asked, looking a bit worried for his nephew. "It seems his haki awoke during the War of Best, so no, he didn't have it at the time, but he didn't need it to win," Tamago said, making many look confused, but Daifuku was the one to speak up. "He said it just a few minutes ago. Luffy's immune to lightning. Against a lightning logia with an obvious ego like Enel, Luffy could win even without haki," Daifuku said, making Tamago nod at the third eldest son. After defeating Enel, they then sailed to Water 7 where their ship had begun breaking down. It seems the keel had been cracked during a prior battle, Tamago said, making those who sailed wince in sympathy and worry. There had been no way for his ship to be fixed. There seemed to have been some sort of argument between the sniper and Luffy over the ship that ended with the sniper leaving the crew. During this time it seems that the government agent CP9 had taken Robin by threatening the rest of the crew. Most of the reports are muddled on what exactly happened, but it seems that they had taken Robin to Eni's lobby and that Luffy took down many of the soldiers there when he thrashed it to get her back, Tamago said, glancing worriedly at Brulee. "According to our reports, it seems that he burnt down the world government flag," Tamago said, wincing as Brulee sucked in a sharp breath. Big Mom ended up choking slightly on her tea cake and most of the siblings had their jaws on the ground. "He declared war on the world for Devil's Child?" Oven asked, gaping in disbelief and earning a nod. "People do crazy things when they're in love, especially when their loved one is in danger," Big Mom said, her voice almost whimsical and nostalgic. "Not to mention if the report of Devil's Child bearing Luffy's child is true. A man would go to great lengths to protect the woman he loves, even more so when there is a baby involved," Big said, smiling at his own wife and son. He was pretty sure that if Robin had Luffy's, or anyone else's, child it would have been in the paper, so he was pretty sure she didn't have one, but better to go along with it. More entertainment for him. "At least he's taking responsibility for the baby," Brulee muttered, making her siblings that heard nod in agreement. From there his crew fought against CP9 and they won. However, a buster call had already been sent out for the island and it was only due to their ship somehow coming to their aid that they escaped alive with Robin in tow. From there it seems Luffy was out for several days, during which his new shipwright Frankie built them the new ship the Thousand Sunny, Tamago reported as he slid a picture of the Sunny onto the table where it was eagerly snatched up by Brulee. "Not exactly snack-themed like our ships, but it will certainly make people underestimate them," Perospero said, peering over his sister's shoulder before he gently took the picture from her to pass it around to the others and Mama. It seems that Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp was seen in the area at the same time but left the pirates unharmed, Tamago said, making Brulee narrow her eyes slightly. "He's Dragon's father, which means he's Luffy's grandfather," Brulee admitted, making some of the other siblings let out low whistles and Big Mom to stare at her daughter in disbelief. She had never really pieced together the Monkey D part even after Brulee's marriage to Dragon. "You sure know how to pick them, Brulee nay," Smoothie said, making Brulee blush a bit and shrug sheepishly. She didn't even know it until after she had been married to Dragon, when the man himself came busting up onto their ship during their honeymoon and berating Dragon for never inviting him to the wedding. Somehow escaping from Garp, they then seemed to have sailed straight into the Floridina Triangle where they fought and defeated the warlord Mariah. That also seems to be where they recruited a musician named Brook who, while it appears he either wears a skeleton suit all of the time, Or he is a skeleton. Tamago said, making Big Mom look interested. Oh, that's rare. Big Mom said, her eyes gleaming slightly while Brûlée rested her head on the table. What is with my son and picking fights with warlords? Brûlée asked no one specifically and earning amused looks from her siblings. After leaving the Floridan Triangle, it seems they went to Sayobati to get their ship coated. Tamago said, making Big nod. I can tell you what happened there. All of us supernovas were there at the same time, and let me tell you something, Brûlée. Big blew out a puff of smoke from his cigar as he looked at his sister-in-law. Your son is either a mad genius in the making, or one hell of an idiot. Big said bluntly, causing Brûlée to nearly fly over the table and try to wring Bega's neck. The only reason she didn't was because Amanda and Compote had quickly grabbed her and nearly tackled her to the floor. Are you trying to get Brûlée Nate to kill you? Chiffon couldn't help but ask her husband while Perispero and Galette moved to restrain their sister as well. Hey, it's not my fault her kid thought it'd be a good idea to punch a celestial dragon. Big said, holding his hands up in his own defense and making everyone freeze. He did what? Cinnamon asked, staring at her brother-in-law in disbelief and shock, along with everyone else, even Big Mom. Yeah, kid punched a celestial dragon and called an admiral on everyone. From what I heard, they escaped the admiral thanks to Dark King, really, but he and his crew were all sent flying thanks to the warlord Kuma. Big said, causing Brûlée to close her eyes and hit her head on the floor behind her since Perispero and Galette had used their powers to stick her to the floor. My son is insane. I fully blame this on the idiot that stole him from me. Brûlée said, breaking the silence amongst everyone and earning several snorts of laughter from her siblings. Mama. My grandson is an interesting one. Perhaps a bit stupid but interesting nonetheless. Big Mom said, laughing herself in disbelief at the report. Gotta say though, sis. Your kid has some big balls on him to do something like that. Daifuku said, grinning and earning a glare from Brûlée, who was scowling at all of her laughing siblings. Stop laughing, you idiots. This means I need to teach my son the merits of ambushes and actually using his brain, and that his actions have consequences. Seriously, what the hell was Dragon teaching him that Luffy went off and did something that fucking stupid? Brûlée ranted about her idiot husband having stolen her son and just turned him into an idiot meathead like he was. Of all things for her boy to do, he punched a fucking celestial dragon. Her words just had her siblings laughing harder. However, after being separated by Kuma, it seems that Luffy has somehow ended up on Amazon Lily, the Isle of Women. Tamago said, earning jealous looks from the males of the family. The legendary Island of Women. Sis, your son either has the best luck in the world or the worst. Monty Dore said, looking jealous of his nephew's luck. I swear he hair by the time he gets here. Brûlée said, making her siblings bust out laughing again. Seriously, what were the odds that their cautious if clumsy sister would have a son that got into such messes? Somehow, even while he was stuck on the island, he managed to break into Marineford in an attempt to save his brother Ace. Tamago said, making all laughter stop as they stared at him in complete disbelief. Are you shitting me, Tamago? Big Mom asked, staring at the man who shook his head in the negative. He broke into the government's most secure prison. Of course he did. He punched a celestial dragon after all. Brûlée looked ready to just give up right now as she stared up at the ceiling in dismay. Reports say that he went in alone, but came back out with an army that included the legendary Ivankov, former warlord Crocodile, and even Jimbei himself. From there they went straight to Marineford. Tamago said, making Big give a small smirk. Yeah, kid made a hell of an entrance. Their ship got stuck at the top of a frozen tsunami and they came falling down from the sky towards a completely iced-over plaza, and somehow landed in the one area where there was no ice thanks to an earlier attack in the fight. Big said, laughing a bit. There his heritage as Dragon's son was revealed to the world, and he managed to be acknowledged even by Whitebeard going so far as to let Luffy lead the charge. Tamago said, hurrying this part up since he knew that Mama did not like Whitebeard at all. Somehow he managed to make it up to the execution platform and free his brother. However, on their way back to the ship something happened and Fire Fist Ace died in Luffy's arms. Tamago said, making all of the siblings look upset as they glanced at each other. They knew what it was like to lose a sibling, but for that sibling to die in their arms. How broken was Straw Hat? Brûlée struggled against her binds, wanting to go find her son. She needed to check on him, see him for herself. It's unknown for sure what happened from there, but Straw Hat Luffy and his crew vanished for 2 years, and during that time it seems as if he were being trained by Dark King Rayleigh himself. Tamago said, making all of the siblings look surprised and Big Mom's eyes to narrow. For Rayleigh himself to take an interest in Luffy, that means he saw something in the brat, something he liked. Big Mom said her eyes narrowed dangerously as she thought about that for a moment. After the 2 years of training, the Straw Hats met back up on Sayobody, where they then left for Fishman Island. From our spies there I found out that a crew of fishmen were trying to take over the island and kill the royal family, and during the fight when Luffy and his crew tried to stop the crew led by Hody, that is when the candy factory was damaged. Tamago said, catching Big Mom's attention. So that's what really happened to the factory? Big Mom said, making Tamago nod. Yes, it was damaged in the fight, and Luffy claimed that he had eaten it so that you would target him instead of Fishman Island. Of course reports do say that he did eat a lot over the course of his stay at Fishman Island, so him eating most of the candy is in fact completely possible. Tamago said, making Brûlé nod slightly. Yeah, Dragon and his father both can put away a lot of food on par with any of us. I'm not surprised my boy has the same appetite. Brûlé said, smiling ever so slightly at that. Dragon, don't just blame it on the kid's father, Brûlé. You've got a big appetite yourself, you know. Opera said, causing the other siblings to grin and tease their sister a bit. Yeah, last I checked you could eat twice your body weight in food without being full. Cinnamon teased her sister, who blushed a bit. Not that that says much really. Cracker said, snickering. Yeah, Brûlé is like a twig. She weighs less than any of us over the age of 15. Even Galette and Monty Dore weigh more than her. Smoothie said, smirking a bit while Brûlé blushed. Even I can pick Brûlé up and carry her for a few hours without feeling strain. That's how light you are, sis, but you wouldn't know it from all the food you can eat. Perospero said, dissolving the candy that was on his sister and picking her up to prove his point. Put me down, you moron. Brûlé said, blushing bright red and floundering slightly as Perospero picked her up and swung her around as if she weighed less than a feather, causing the others to break out laughing. And, as we recently learned, Luffy and another supernova, the Surgeon of Death Law, has taken down and defeated Flamingo the Warlord, with Luffy being the one to do the most damage it seems. His new bounty poster came out earlier today. Tamago said, causing the laughter to stop as everyone stared at him as he held out a bounty poster. Let me see. Brûlé struggled in Perispero's hold until she finally was set down and the bounty handed to her despite her hands still being bound. 500 million belly, s. That's higher than Tamago's and Bega's and almost as high as Snack's, Brûlé said, shocked as she stared at the poster. Wow, my little nephew seems to be becoming quite the powerhouse, Perispero said as he took the bounty poster from Brûlé and looked at it before handing it to the others, who all gaped in disbelief or made sounds of surprise. Interesting. The blood of the Charlottes really does run strongly within him. My bounty didn't reach that high until I was 23. You should be proud, Brûlé. Big Mom said, smiling down at her daughter as she handed the wanted poster back. I am Mama, besides. Here Brûlé smiled brightly up at her mother and held up the wanted poster at the same time. None of her siblings could disagree with the next thing she said, not with the picture so close to her face to provide comparison to. He has my smile. Hello? Are you there? Brûlé nearly dropped the wanted poster as she scrambled to grab her communications mirror when she heard Katakori's tired and seemingly pained voice. Brother Katakori. Are you alright? Brûlé asked, looking worried about her brother who was missing his scarf. Yeah, I made it to the Straw Hats ship, just in time to prevent Sanji from getting too far away on a Germa vessel, but we were attacked by the Germa's soldiers. We're finally on our way to see you, and don't worry, sis. Even without my help your boy is just fine. Barring anything else we should be there in 2 days. Katakori said before his view was blocked by a scrawny little guy with a scar under one eye and a straw hat upon his head. Hey, is that my mom? You said you were taking me to see my mom, old man? I want to see, and why are you using a mirror? Do you just like talking to your reflection, or? Hey cool, there's a lady in the mirror. Luffy said, making Brûlé giggle a bit at hearing her brother get called old. Hello there, Luffy-chan. My name's Brûlé. Brûlé said, her voice soft, warm, and loving even as she blinked back her tears. This was her first time actually speaking to her son. Her siblings remained respectfully silent. Hi, cool scar. I got one too, see? So we sort of match. Why are you in the mirror, lady? Did you get stuck? Luffy asked, tilting his head at the end and earning a few snickers and giggles from those who remembered when Brûlée first ate her devil fruit. Compote in particular gave a loud snicker as she recalled finding her sister trapped half in the mirror world when she had tried to come out of a mirror that was a bit too small for her. You'll have to tell me how you got that when we meet up, okay? And no, I'm not stuck in the mirror. It's a part of my power. I can tell you more when Katakuri Oni-chan gets you and your crew here. Brûlée said, glaring slightly at her siblings but smiling at her son. Okay, but most of my crew won't be here. Some of them stayed in Zou while the rest of us came to get Sanji back, but your brother brought him back earlier. So he'll see you whenever we get there. Oi Sanji, meet. Luffy ducked out of view of the mirror as he yelled for his cook. You rubber-brained idiot. You just had lunch. Katakuri chuckled a bit from the shout that came from off of the mirror's screen. Your son has quite the appetite, Brûlée. Honestly, I wouldn't question it if he did eat those sweets from Fishman Island. However, it seems he likes meat more than he does candy. Katakuri said, amused as he glanced over his shoulder and then back to his sister. What about Brûlée's grandchild? Is it a girl or a boy? Are they coming with? Perospero asked, leaning in close to his sister so that Katakuri could see him as well. Grandchild? I saw no children or babies on the ship. Hold on, I'll ask. Katakuri said, looking surprised and confused. Hey, are there any babies or children as part of the crew? My brother thinks that your captain has a child. Katakuri asked someone nearby, earning a snort from a definitely female voice. The only child on this crew is Luffy. Besides, I'm not even sure he knows where babies come from. A woman said from nearby, making Perospero raise an eyebrow. Isn't he 19, sis? Perospero asked, looking at Brûlée, who nodded her head. Yes, he'll be 20 come this Children's Day. Brûlée said, making all of her siblings over the age of 15 look confused. Then how does he not know where babies come from? We received that talk when we were 9. Amanda said, looking completely confused at this as she looked around at her siblings, who all nodded in agreement. Don't question it, just let my baby boy stay innocent. Besides, I'm too young to be a grandmother. Brûlée said, earning snorts from her siblings and even Big Mom, while Katakuri snickered. One remark about my age and I'll leave you trapped in a mirror in the dungeon cells, brother. Brûlée glared at Daifuku, who had just opened his mouth only to slowly close it. Oi, old man. Come look at this. It's so cool and it looks delicious. Luffy called from off-screen, making Katakuri sigh but look, only to nearly drop his mirror. Luffy, don't eat that. Katakuri really did drop his mirror as he dashed over to his nephew. That's poisonous. Katakuri cried, making Brûlée nearly panic. Brother Katakuri, what's going on? Brûlée shouted through the mirror, looking ready to dive right on in. Don't worry, I can suck the poison out. A second woman's voice said while Katakuri sighed and picked the mirror back up, his eye twitching slightly. Luffy just ate a fish that's partially poisonous, and he swallowed the damn thing raw and whole. It's alright since it seems the female Vinsmoke is sucking the poison out right now. Brûlée, don't go completely nuts, okay? Katakuri asked, looking at his sister, who looked a bit relieved at this. Why would I go completely new? Hey pink lady, why'd you put your lips on mine? Luffy could be heard asking, which cut off Brûlée's question and made the woman tense almost painfully. What? Brûlée's voice was dark, cold and sharp as her eyes began to glow slightly and narrow. All of the mirrors began trembling again. It's poisoned pink Reiju of the Vinsmokes. She sucked the poison out of his body. Since he ingested it, there was only one way to suck the poison out. Katakuri hurried to explain to his sister, who narrowed her eyes a little more but began to relax a bit. And what's one of the Sweet Three commanders doing here? Reiju asked, looking at Katakuri, who gave her a bored look and turned back to his sister. Are you here to steal the dud? Yanji asked, smirking at the man, and earning a glare from Luffy. Oi! Don't call Sanji a dud. He's able to kick your ass even without any of those fancy suits. Luffy yelled at Yanji, who gave an arrogant laugh as Katakuri turned the mirror so that Brûlée, and Perospero by extension, could see what was about to happen. Show respect to your betters, you little brat, Yanji yelled as he tried to hit Luffy with one of his kicks. Luffy just gave him a bored look and ignored him, and before the fool could actually kick Luffy, a flaming foot was in the way. Oi, Luffy's the captain, you know, and you're on his ship. Here he's the highest authority, and if you want to get to my captain, Sanji, the missing Vinsmoke prince, said looking bored as he blocked his brother's kick without looking too bothered. Well, I might not be the first mate, but you're not even worthy enough of fighting him. Much less Luffy. Sanji said, lighting a cigarette and looking his younger brother dead in the eye. Oh sure, so let him fight the last of the monster trio. That sounds about right. An orange-haired girl said sarcastically, even though she was ready to fight as well. He's lucky Robin's not here to hear him say that. Last time someone tried saying that Luffy should respect to his better, she broke his spine. A cute little tanuki-looking thing said innocently. Yo ho ho. Yes, Robin can indeed be a tad possessive. It's only natural after all that Luffy-san has done for her. Of course, the same can go for the rest of us. Shall I throw him overboard, Captain? The skeleton that Tamago told them about asked, tilting his head at Luffy, who looked up and then grinned. Nah. He's not worth it. Luffy said, grinning brightly and making his crew relax, although Sanji didn't lower his foot, which was still crossed with his former brothers. And if he attacks you again? Sanji asked, not looking away from the green-haired Vinsmoke in front of him. Then I trust you to handle it, Sanji. You look like you really want to fight him anyways, so it's fine, isn't it? Luffy asked, grinning with positively 2/3 the radiance of the sun, which made Yanji recoil in disbelief while Reiju looked interested. HMPH. Leave it to me, Captain. Sanji said, smirking slightly even as he moved his foot to knock his former brother over to the side and away from his captain. Why, you useless? If you finish those words, then Luffy will ensure you need to be fished out of, warned the green-haired one in advance, which seemed to snap Reiju out of her trance. Yanji. We aren't here to pick a fight. Get back on the ship and stop making a mess of things. Reiju said, even as she moved over and kicked the green-haired one back onto their ship. She. That was funny. You're nice not to let him beat up on Sunny like that, pink lady. Oh, and thank you for saving me from the poison, Luffy said, grinning at Reiju, who blushed under his grin, causing Brûlé to narrow her eyes and begin growling. Just watch, sister. Katakuri stopped Brûlé from saying anything, looking definitely amused. Anytime, cutie. Reiju said, kissing Luffy's cheek and earning a confused tilt of the head. Hey, why are you doing that again? Is there some poison still on me? Luffy asked, confused and making Parasparrow break out into helpless laughter at the look of disbelief on Reiju's face. No, Reiju managed to say, causing Luffy to frown before he grinned again. Oh, I know. You must be hungry. Oi, Sanji, food, Luffy said, grinning at his chef, who looked torn between laughing and kicking his captain. No, I'm not. Reiju was cut off by Luffy giving her another tilt of the head, causing a small heart to appear in her visible eye. Much like one appeared in Sanji's eyes when he saw a pretty lady. She. You're kinda weird, aren't you? Luffy asked, making Nami and Brook both laugh. That's coming from Luffy of all people, Chopper said, looking at the scene in amused disbelief. Oh, I know, pink lady, join my crew, Luffy said, grinning up at her and making his crew pause for a moment before they merely smiled and shook their heads. I'll have to call Robin and the others when we're back in range to let them know. Welcome aboard, sis, Nami said, patting Reiju's shoulder and walking off. It's nice to have another new crew member, Chopper said, beaming up at Reiju, who looked at them all in disbelief. I'm sorry, but I have to refuse, Reiju tried to say gently, making Sanji chuckle. You shouldn't have said that, sis, Sanji told his sister, the only family member he could actually stand to acknowledge. I refuse your refusal, Luffy said, completely ignoring what Sanji had said. It doesn't work like that, Reiju shouted at Luffy, who tilted his head. Yo ho ho ho. Luffy-san never gives up or compromises once he's made up his mind. May I see your… Brook began, only for Sanji to glare at him. Brook, that's my sister. Ask her that. And here Sanji was cut off by Brook bowing in apology. Ah, I see, forgive me. I was unaware of the relation. Family of crew members is strict no territory after all. Brook apologized while Reiju looked confused and in disbelief. I said I wasn't joining your crew, Reiju said, making all of the present Straw Hats except for Luffy give her flat looks. We weren't going to join at first either, but trust me, Luffy will literally kick anyone's ass for a crew member, and once he decides you're a part of the crew, you're a part of the crew. It's that simple, Nami said bluntly and making Luffy nod in agreement. Yep. Why don't you want to join? It's fun being a pirate. You get to be free and follow your dreams. Oh, I know, is it because someone else won't let you join the crew? Tell me who, I'll kick their ass. Luffy said, bouncing in place slightly and making Reiju give him a look of disbelief. He means it too. Trust me sis, I tried refusing too and it didn't work. It's much simpler to go along with it. Oi Luffy. What's her position in the crew anyways? Sanji asked, making Luffy tilt his head to the side slightly. What is she good at, or what does she want to do? Luffy asked, making his mother slam her palm into her forehead, while Parasparrow laughed harder and even Compote was laughing now. He doesn't even know what she can do and he invites her? Amanda asked in disbelief, making Big Mom laugh as well. She's good with poisons. Sanji spoke up in his sister's place, making Luffy tilt his head. Then she can be our poison expert, Luffy said, grinning brightly. Oh, she can help me make antidotes, Chopper said brightly at this as he ran over to beam up at Reiju. Just don't get Robin's help. She comes up with enough scary ideas without trying to make them come true in the shape of poisons, Nami said, making Brook nod rapidly in agreement. She. You guys are funny. Oi old man. Are we gonna go meet my mom? Luffy asked, looking at Katakuri curiously. Yes, Katakuri said simply and making Luffy grin. Cool, I wonder what it's like having a mom. Luffy said brightly and making Brûlée jerk as if she had been shot. All laughter that was left instantly ceased. You never had a mom? Brook asked, looking at Luffy, who shook his head but didn't look upset. Nope. When I was little I would usually stay by myself or with Makino. It was only after I met Shanks and ate my devil fruit that Gramps took me to Dayton and the Mountain Bandits, where I met Ace and Sabo. I didn't even know I had a mom until the old man told me, Luffy said, smiling brightly and making Brûlée look upset even as Luffy's crew didn't look surprised. You didn't know about your dad either until your grandpa told you, Sanji acknowledged, making Luffy nod. Yeah, I thought the mystery baby bird just dropped me off with only Gramps, Luffy said, although his smile didn't drop. Mystery baby bird? Reiju asked, looking at Luffy confused. Yeah, the mystery bird that brings babies. That's how parents get babies, right? Luffy asked, looking confused and making all of Brûlée's siblings over the age of 14 except Katakuri break out in helpless laughter. Luffy, who told you that? Nami asked, her eye twitching a bit. Ace did when Dayton had some bandits try and teach me about birds and bees. I don't know why though. I already knew bees made honey and birds taste really good after you cook them and lay eggs. Luffy said simply and causing his crew members present to laugh a bit, but it seemed strained. Should we tell him? Brook asked, sweat dropping slightly as he looked at his clueless captain. If you do, my sister, his mother, is likely to kill you, Katakuri said bluntly and earning an even bigger sweat drop from the skeleton. Ah. Brook said simply. Hey old man, why are they laughing? Luffy asked, looking at Katakuri confused. Brother, don't you dare, Brûlée growled at Katakuri. Your mother will tell you, Katakuri said, smirking a bit as he patted Luffy's head and ignored the shriek from the mirror as he began to put it away, also ignoring the laughter from his mother and siblings. Katakuri. Hey cool, this whole place is nothing but candy and cake, Luffy shouted with stars in his eyes as Katakuri led him and his crew through the castle towards the throne room, as it were known as, where Brûlée and quite a few other siblings were waiting with their mother. Indeed. Your mother and the rest of your aunts and uncles, or most of those who wanted to meet you anyways, are through this door, as is your grandmother, Katakuri began to say, his scarf back on over his face as soon as the Sunny got within sights of the Candy Kingdom. Wait. Don't break the door, Katakuri said, his hand snapping out to grab Luffy by his vest the very next second, causing the boy to stretch a bit before bouncing back like a yo-yo. Honestly, Katakuri was abusing the hell out of his observation hockey just so he could have some fun stopping his nephew from taking off at fast paces and doing something stupid, and get to see the resulting bounce back quite literally in more than a few cases. Honestly, his nephew was so amusing, especially when he would pout about not being able to have fun, which turned out could range from something simple like fishing, to something completely outrageous like trying to pick a fight with a Sea King, and then try and dive into the ocean to fight said Sea King. Why am I here? I said I wasn't joining his crew, Reiju asked from beside Sanji while Yanji was following them with a scowl on his face. Yo ho ho ho. Don't worry. You will, Brook said with his ever-present grin, being that he couldn't make his teeth form much else. as Nami patted Reiju's shoulder in sympathy. "You get used to it," Nami said, trying to help and only earning an incredulous look from Reiju. "Mother, siblings. I've returned with my nephew. Brûlé, why are you stuck to the floor?" Katakuri entered the room with Luffy still in his grasp. His attention diverted to something that he hadn't seen with his haki. True to what he said, his almost 12-foot-tall sister was stuck half to the floor, half to the wall, by a lot of candy that obviously came from Perispero. She sensed you arriving at the edge of the kingdom and was ready to race off. Given what happened last time she ran off without thinking, we stopped her before she could get too far, Perispero said, earning a nod from his slightly younger brother. Given how clumsy or outright ditzy Brûlé could be, especially when in a hurry, it was a good thing that Perispero stopped her. "Ah, and thanks to Galette your hands are bound. That means you couldn't summon a mirror to escape," Katakuri said, not bothering to ask since he already knew. Brûlé, however, grinned at him. "Don't be so sure, brother. I have a few tricks up my sleeve not even you know of, I believe," Brûlé said, making everyone stare at her. Katakuri knew everything they could or were about to do with his observation haki. "I even figured out a way to get around your haki," Brûlé said, making jaws drop while Katakuri stared for a moment before he winced and clutched his head. "Bingo! Mirror, mirror, shattering reflection," Brûlé announced before it seemed as if she shattered like glass, causing her siblings to jerk or cry out in horror. "Oh, calm down, I'm fine," Brûlé called from the other side of the room, making everyone whirl around to look at her. "How?" Even Big Mom was surprised and shocked by this turn of events, but Brûlé shook her head. "Later, Mama. There are untrusted ears after all," Brûlé said, looking specifically at the Vinsmoke siblings. "Yo-ho-ho. A pleasure to meet. If you ask my mother or sisters that question, I'm going to permanently kill you," Katakuri said, recovering and glaring at the skeleton who had stepped forward. "Don't be a pervert." Nami wasted no time in slamming a fist into Brook's head, sending him crashing to the floor and causing Sanji to hand over some milk he had on him for just this reason when Chopper panicked over seeing another crack in Brook's skull. She. Luffy laughed at his crew's actions, but he was looking over at Brûlé, whose eyes met his and her face softened as she stared at him. "Back up a bit," Katakuri told the rest of the crew, pulling Yanji back by force, as Brûlé walked over and stood in front of Luffy. Nami and Chopper gaped at how much taller she seemed when she was closer to them. "Hello there, Luffy-chan. It's nice to finally meet you," Brûlé said, swallowing thickly as she looked down at Luffy, who gave her a confused look. Katakuri's palm met his forehead a second before Luffy opened his mouth. "You're the lady from in the mirror," Luffy said, grinning as he recalled where he had seen her earlier, earning snorts or giggles from all of Brûlé's assembled siblings and a laugh from Big Mom. "I ate a devil fruit so I can talk through mirrors, yes, but more importantly, did Katakuri tell you who exactly I am?" Brûlé asked, her voice soft and gentle as she smiled slightly at Luffy, even as she kept her powers vague due to the Vinsmokes. You're one of his sisters, right? He said he had a lot of siblings," Luffy said, his face turning red and a bit of steam beginning to pour out of his ears as he tried to think, earning a few giggles from those watching. "Well, yes, I am one of his siblings. My name is Brûlé Charlotte. I am the 8th daughter of the Charlotte family, a member of the Big Mom Pirates, and the Lady of the Seducing Woods." Here Brûlé pointedly ignored her brother slapping the green-haired Vinsmoke upside the head before he could even open his mouth, and then clamp a hand down over the prince's mouth firmly. The brat couldn't say anything she hadn't heard before, whether it was said to her face or when someone thought she couldn't hear. Most of all, Luffy-chan. Here Brûlé paused and kneeled down in front of Luffy so that she was closer to his eye level. "I'm your mother," Brûlé said, looking him straight in the eye. Everything and everyone was silent for a moment as everyone stared to see how Luffy would react, only for most to be distracted by Katakuri slamming his free hand into his forehead again. "Oh, that's nice," Luffy said brightly, making most fall over in disbelief, and Brûlé's face looked torn between shock and heartbreak before Luffy looked at her confused while Katakuri suddenly began trembling and looking furious. "Aren't you gonna hit me?" Luffy asked, confused and blinking at her. At that, everyone looked shocked or confused, while Big Mom looked furious at the question. It wasn't something someone normally asked when meeting their mother for the very first time. "No, why would I hit you?" Brûlé asked, shocked and horrified that her son thought she would even think of it. But I always get hit when I meet family members. Gigi hits me all the time. Ace Ni spat on me the first time we met. He and Sabo Ni were planning on killing me when I first met Sabo Ni, and I'm about 60% sure Dad is the one who struck me with lightning when Buggy tried executing me just before I entered the Grand Line. Ah, but maybe Dad knew I was made of rubber and wouldn't get hurt from the lightning. I'm not sure about that one really. Luffy trailed off, scratching his cheek as he tried thinking about that last bit, then gave it up as a bad job. Oh, and when the old man came to our ship and said he was my mom's brother, I got hit with something then too, but I think that was cause I was trying to sneak more food from the kitchen since that was Sanji. Luffy said, as if remembering that part and making Brûlée tremble a bit in both rage and sorrow. Her son never got to meet a single family member without getting hurt or spat on. Why did Dragon take him from her? What kind of life was that for her son? See, now you're shaking like Nami does when really mad. So do I get my hit now? Luffy asked, smiling brightly up at Brûlée, whose arms shot out and wrapped around him. No, I'm not going to hit you. I'll never hit you, baby boy. Brûlée said, her voice wavering as she hugged Luffy close while he looked confused. Weren't hugs only for siblings or nakama? Hits were for family or a fight. Mom? Brûlée nearly broke out, and son call her that for the first time. I think you're confused. See, older siblings and parents and grandparents are supposed to hit the younger one when they meet. Hugs are for siblings after the hit and for nakama. Luffy said, tilting his head like a curious puppy while Sanji lowered his head even as his leg began to smoke. Brook was leaning on his cane with his eyeless sockets somehow seeming dark and cold as he stared at nothing. Nami was shaking in fury with her fists clenched. And even Chopper was looking angry and dismayed. They never knew a lot about Luffy's past, never really thought to ask him about it since he cared so little about their origin stories, as Robin labeled them. This though? Thinking that family members didn't give hugs but hits? Oh, were the Straw Hats going to have words with Garp and possibly Sabo when they saw him next? By the looks of it, the Charlottes might be joining in on those words too. No, baby, that's not right. Parents and siblings shouldn't hit each other outside of sparring and training or try to kill each other. I'm not going to hit you, baby boy. Brûlée said, shaking as she tried to figure out if she should be more pissed or more heartbroken. Her baby boy. He was so confused and broken, and gods, he didn't even know that something was wrong. I'm not going to hit you. I'm going to hug you and keep hugging you until you realize that I love you. I love you and I'm not going to hurt you. Brûlée said, her sadness beginning to win over her righteous motherly fury. Luffy blinked for a minute before tilting his head again, Katakuri's face palm earning enough attention from the others that it made everyone give a semi-hysterical, mostly disbelieving laugh at Luffy's innocent question. He truly was a Charlotte, but this shouldn't be funny. What's love? Can I eat it? So you're Big Mom? Luffy asked, tilting his head at the woman on the throne who stared down at him and nodded her head. Katakuri stared at Luffy like he was an idiot. Okay. So you're the one I have to beat up so I can claim Fishman Island and get Jimbei to join my crew. Luffy said, and there was pure silence for a moment before Brûlée slammed her palm into her forehead. Luffy-chan, don't pick fights with your grandmother please. Brûlée said, making Luffy blink and then tilt his head. Ba-chan. So is she going to hit me then? Luffy asked, looking up at Big Mom, who clenched a fist but did not move to strike him just yet. No, not unless we're fighting or training. Big Mom said, her voice hard and making Luffy grin at her. Okay. I only brought a few crewmates with me to get Sanji back. When we have our fight, let's have our whole crews there. That way everyone can have fun. Luffy said, grinning brightly and making some of his aunts and uncles stare at him like he was a loon. You call fighting and murder fun? Flambe asked, staring at her nephew, who frowned. Fighting is fun, murder is not. We don't kill anyone if we can help it. We're not those kinds of pirates. Luffy said, frowning at Flambe seriously. I lost my brother, why would I want to take away someone else's brother or sister or mom or dad? Luffy asked, making some of the siblings wince and look away while Brûlée smiled down at her son, although she looked sad as well. As soon as the words left his mouth, his crew looked guilty as they looked away. Reiju's eyes widened and she looked sympathetic. Yanji just gave a small scoff from behind Katakuri's hand. Why don't you tell me about everything? About your crew, your adventures, where you grew up, Brûlée said, changing the subject as she guided her son towards the middle of the room. Okay. What do you want me to start with? Luffy asked, grinning brightly as he sat cross-legged on the floor completely at ease. How about something simple? Why don't you tell us about your crew and how you met them? Amanda asked as she lit another cigarette, tilting her hat back a bit to look at her nephew who looked at her and blinked. Whoa, your neck. Luffy was wide-eyed and made some of the siblings recoil, expecting him to react negatively as most did. It's so cool, I want one like that, Luffy said, dashing over to Amanda and scrambling up her back without waiting for permission. At that, the newly lit cigarette fell from Amanda's mouth in surprise, having expected him to react negatively. Luffy, what have we told you about climbing on people? Nami yelled at her captain, who was already clinging to Amanda's shoulders, and looked over at her grinning sheepishly. If they aren't nakama, I should ask first, Luffy recited, making Nami nod her head. So why are you climbing on her without asking first? Nami demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. You're my aunt, aren't you? Luffy asked, stretching his neck around to look at Amanda, who could only nod slowly. So that makes you nakama, right, since you didn't hit me? Luffy asked, grinning up at her and earning another slow nod, while Brûlé flinched at hearing her son questioning whether they could be family since they didn't hit him. That might not be what exactly he said, but that's how it sounded. See, so just relax, Nami. You should come meet everyone, Luffy said, earning a tick mark from Sanji. Don't talk to Nami Swan like that, shitty captain, Sanji said, making Brûlé glare at him darkly while Luffy looked confused. Like what? Luffy seemed completely confused while Katakuri gave a small snort. He has a point, Luffy, that is, Katakuri said just before Sanji opened his mouth. Don't tell her what to do, Sanji said, making Luffy look even more confused if that were possible. But I'm the captain, that's my job, Luffy said, causing Sanji to open his mouth only to pause. He actually said something that made sense, Nami said, surprised and making Chopper freak out. Ah, doctor. He needs a doctor. Luffy never makes sense, Chopper screamed as he ran around panicked. You're the doctor. Nami and Sanji both shouted at Chopper while Brook just laughed. Oh right, Chopper said before rushing over to Luffy and trying to tug him down to height level to check on him. She. You guys are as funny as always, Luffy laughed at his crewmate's actions, waving off Chopper's rattled list of things that might be wrong with him. Oh right, I was gonna tell you about my crew, wasn't I? Luffy asked, finally getting off of Amanda's back with Chopper tugging on his pants leg so that he could check on his captain. Who should I start with? Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Chopper, Brook, Frankie, Nami, Robin. Luffy trailed off, thinking about who to start with curiously. What I want to hear about is how the hell you survived being sent to Amazon Lily, Monty Dore said, earning a few nods from his brothers. Amazon Lily? Oh, the place with Hancock and her friends, right? They're really weird, but they're nice too. It was thanks to Hancock I was able to get into Impelled Down and get the cuffs off of Ace, Luffy said, smiling brightly while Sanji was beginning to cry slightly with a small murderous aura around him. Yanji looked jealous. Reiju looked surprised. The rest of the Straw Hats just looked confused or amused. They did protect us when the Marines tried to sink Sunny as we were leaving Sayobadi, and Luffy admitted he made friends with them then. Nami recalled that, making Sanji's murderous aura increase. Katakuri gave snort of amusement that earned looks from his siblings. I still say you weren't training at all, were you? Sanji demanded, making Luffy look confused. Of course I was. What else would I be doing? Luffy asked, completely sincere and causing all the jaws of his uncles, aside from Katakuri, to drop open in disbelief while the women of the family looked pleased. Reiju stared at Luffy as if she didn't know what to make of him, and Yanji was gaping at Luffy like he couldn't believe what he heard. Sanji just ended up pounding his fist on the floor, claiming it wasn't fair. Nami, Sanji's acting weird again. Didn't this stop when he saw the mermaids? Luffy asked, tilting his head at his navigator, who sighed heavily. I swear his brain is made of rubber. Don't worry about it, Luffy. He'll be fine, Nami said, making Luffy look confused but grin. If you say so, as long as he's not flying on a nosebleed again, it should be alright. We didn't bring any more of his blood type with us on the Sunny, Luffy said, grinning and making Sanji glare hatefully at his captain. You can't hold that against me. I was still getting used to seeing real women after 2 years of hell under that bastard Ivankov, Sanji said angrily, and making Luffy grin even brighter than before. Oh, you were with Eva-chan? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Luffy asked, causing Sanji to snarl and moved as if to lunge at his captain, who just laughed at him. You were in heaven while I was stuck in the depths of hell, you little bastard, Sanji yelled, shaking his captain a bit by his vest and earning another laugh from the rubber boy. Nami, Sanji's acting weird again. How is being with Eva-chan considered hell? Eva-chan is really strong and funny and he helped me break out of Impel Down and try and save Ace. Luffy said, looking at the navigator, who sighed slightly. I don't know who Ivankov is, Luffy, so I don't know why Sanji said that, although the fact that he hasn't tried to flirt with any of the women in the room is a surprise. Nami said, making Sanji blink and look around at the women in the room. His eyes turned to hearts for a minute and then he had to visibly force himself to look away. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are, they're this idiot's family. As Brooke said the other day, family members of crewmates is strictly no-no territory. Sanji said, even as he tried to keep his gaze away from most of the beautiful ladies around the room. And if you tried your usual antics with my siblings, I'd kick your ass. You want to flirt with my sisters, then you either need Mamatham, or to beat me in one-on-one combat first. Katakuri growled out as he crossed his arms and glared down at Sanji. And if you think I'm easy to beat, then try me, Katakuri said, glaring at Yanji now. I could best you easy. Don't bother with him, he's a dud, Yanji said arrogantly, and in an instant he was knocked across the room by a stretched out fist. Don't call Sanji a dud. He's my nakama, Luffy said, frowning seriously at Yanji, who growled angrily. You dare attack a prince of the Germa kingdom? Yanji roared as he lunged at Luffy, only to be kicked away before he could even get close. Of course, even if he had gotten close, Amanda had her sword drawn and Brûlé had moved so that she was standing in front of her son with a mirror already up and ready. You were warned before. Pardon me, ladies, Captain. I believe there's some trash that needs to be taken care of, Sanji said, unclipping the cuff links on his suit as he walked towards his former brother. The young Vinsmoke has forgotten that while he is a prince of Germa, I am the queen of this land. As one of my children, Brûlé is a princess of the kingdom, which makes her son a prince as well, Big Mom said, making Yanji look shocked at that while Reiju looked surprised and shocked as well. Sanji gave a savage grin as he walked towards Yanji, Big Mom's next sentences giving him all the permission he needed without fear of repercussion. He made the mistake of attacking a prince, not just in his own kingdom, but also in front of his family. Free game. Shi. He's really weak. Sanji didn't even have to try hard, Luffy said, laughing at how badly Yanji had his ass kicked a few minutes later as Sanji recuffed his cufflinks and fixed his suit. He walked away from his one-time brother who had part of his headset melted to his head and was bruised and had quite a few broken bones. Of course, Captain. Even Usopp could defeat him within a few minutes, Sanji said, smirking as he lit another cigarette and strolled back over to his crewmates casually. So tell us about your crew, little nephew, Perospero said, looking at his nephew and not showing how amused he was at seeing the missing Vinsmoke kick his own brother's ass with ease. Who should I start with? Luffy asked, tilting his head slightly. There's the main crew: Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Chopper, Brook, Frankie, Nami and Robin. And then there's Vivi, Rebecca, Viola, Law, Bartolomeo, Rudy, Idio, Jimbei, Columbus. Luffy trailed off as he tried to remember more names while even his crewmates with him looked at him confused. Katakuri's head snapped around, however, and his jaw dropped open. Mama, we have a problem. Tamago came rushing in to warn Big Mom, only for there to be a loud crash sound. Lin. A thunderous voice yelled, making everyone look shocked or confused as a giant came stomping in. Where is he, Lin? What do you want with Straw Hat? The large giant boomed, ready for war, and several of his crew members, all giants, right behind him, armed to the teeth. Oh hi Rudy. We were just talking about you. Luffy waved up at the giant happily, causing the giant's face to soften as he looked down at the tiny captain. Luffy, how do you know that giant? Compote was the one to ask slowly as she stared at her nephew, who rubbed the back of his head. I am 6th Division Commander of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. I apologize that there are so few of us on the rescue team Straw Hat, but the rest of the men are out by the boats to guard it just in case, Harjuden said, apologizing to Luffy, who just waved it off. It's okay. We didn't need a rescue really. They just wanted to talk with us, but thanks for having our backs, Rudy, Luffy said, laughing and trying not to twitch at the mention of the Grand Fleet. Luffy, what does he mean by Straw Hat Grand Fleet? Nami asked slowly as she stared at her captain wide-eyed. I do not recall seeing you at Dressrosa Cat Burglar. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier to your crew, Straw Hat. I am Harjuden, commander of the 6th Division of the Grand Fleet with 6,000 men under my command, and we are at your service. Harjuden said, bowing to Luffy even as he spoke to Nami. At that, all of the Charlotte siblings and their mother had their jaws on the ground. There's a Grand Fleet. We have a Grand Fleet and you didn't think to tell us sooner? Nami asked, beginning to strangle her captain, who just pouted a bit. But I didn't want a Grand Fleet, and besides, it's not like it's official or anything since I didn't drink the cup. We're just friends who help each other out when the others are in trouble. Why do you think we'd need rescuing anyways, Rudy? Luffy asked, tilting his head up at the giant, who gave a small glare towards Big Mom. Small for a giant, however, so that wasn't saying much. We had heard from a reliable source that you had promised to beat Big Mom, or rather Linlin, and make Fishman Island your territory. When we heard that you had been seen being taken to Totland by a sweet commander, I gathered my crew and came to assist you as soon as I could. I apologize that the rest of the fleet is not here, but they were too far away when we left. Harjuden said, glaring at Big Mom still before smiling down at Luffy. Luffy? Who knew about this fleet? Sanji asked, his eyebrow twitching and making Luffy tilt his head. Usopp, Frankie, Robin, and Zoro. They were there when they did that oath thing as we were escaping Dressrosa. I thought they told you guys. Luffy said innocently and making Brûlée pinch the bridge of her nose again. I don't know whether to laugh or cry right now, Brûlée said, staring at her siblings in dismay and drawing their attention to her. Sis? Amanda asked, alarmed as she looked at her younger sister, who glanced back at her son, who was laughing at the looks on his crewmates' faces, which earned an answering laugh from Harjuden, who seemed more relaxed now that he knew they weren't being attacked. Mama tries for years to get the giants on her side, even just one or two of them. Then my son shows up after beating one of the feared warlords, and has an army of giants on his side that he complains about. Brûlée said, making her siblings wince a bit. Yeah, when put like that they could see her point. How did you guys get here so fast anyways? We only just got here less than 2 hours ago? Sanji asked, staring up at the giant, who gave a small sheepish smile. After hearing that he promised to defeat Big Mom for Fishman Island, we hurried to find and catch up to you. We thought that we could offer our assistance given the large amount of foes you'd be facing. Harjuden said, eyeing the Charlotte siblings warily as if to prove his point. Just the children of Big Mom alone that were combat ready numbered well over 60, NTO to mention the chess peacekeepers, Bega's crew, and the rest of the Big Mom pirates. No one is fighting anyone outside of a nice calm supervised spar. Brûlée yelped when she saw Luffy's crewmates get a bit tense as they realized how many potential enemies they were surrounded by. She. Mom is acting funny. Having fights with friends is fun, and besides, I want to see how strong my aunts and uncles are, Luffy said, grinning widely as he looked at his assembled family, who all traded wary or bemused looks. Aunts and uncles? Harjuden prompted the small commander, who nodded his head. We didn't bring him for a fight. We brought him here because we learned he was family. He's the son of my younger sister Brûlée. Perospero said finally, and making the giant frown, slightly confused as he looked down at Luffy and then over at Big Mom. I was unaware you were the grandson of Linlin, Harjuden said, looking down at Luffy again and making Luffy nod. Yeah, me too. I didn't even know I had a mom or a grandma until they told me, Luffy said, causing the giant to sweat drop slightly while Brûlée flinched a bit at that. I see. We shall be on the boats, Commander, in case you are attacked at all. If any harm comes to him, Linlin, then be warned. We will not hold back, Harjuden said, glaring at Big Mom as he backed out of the room with the rest of the giants. They're weird, Luffy said, although he was smiling as his crewmate's face palmed. I don't want to hear you of all people calling someone else weird, Nami said, growling slightly at Luffy, who pouted at her before being distracted when Big Mom stood up and stared down at Luffy. Her next words earned a cheer from Luffy that proved he really was a Charlotte. You're a strange and interesting one, grandson. Let's have a banquet. Food? Don't you know that when you're having a banquet you should be singing? Brook, music? Luffy said, grinning even as he surprised some of his younger aunts and uncles with how much he could eat without getting full. Yo-ho-ho-ho, of course, Captain. What song shall I play? Brook asked, already pulling out his guitar from seemingly nowhere. There was this song I heard when I was little back on Dawn Island. Hoisting the colors or something? Can you play that one? Luffy asked, staring up at his musician wide-eyed and making Brook pause for a moment. That doesn't sound familiar. Sing a few verses for me, Captain, and I might recognize it. Brook said, making Luffy bite his lip for a second before nodding as everyone stared at him. The king and his men stole the queen from her bed and bound her in her bones. The seas be ours, and by the powers where we'll row. Luffy said, making Brook frown and tilt his head slightly while a few of the other Charlottes recognized that lyric. Yo-ho, all hands. Hoist the colors high. Parasparrow continued from down the table, making Luffy whip around to look at him wide-eyed and grinning. Heave-ho, thieves and beggars, never shall we die. Compote, Oven, Daifuku, and Katakuri joined in, making a few of the other older siblings grin as well. Luffy laughed gleefully as he sang along with his aunts and uncles as soon the whole table was singing. A few of the Charlottes were even pounding their feet on the ground or their fists on the table in time with the song. Yo-ho, all together. Hoist the colors high. Heave-ho, thieves and beggars. Here even Big Mom joined in, although Luffy's voice seemed to ring the most clear somehow. Never shall we die. From there it went from a semi-formal banquet into a downright party, Straw Hat style, and everyone was invited and or dragged in. You're a fun one, little nephew. Amanda said, smiling more than she had in years as she watched her nephew and his crew turn the banquet into a party from her spot across the table from him. Even the chess peacekeepers were being dragged in by the partying pirates. This is even better than the banquet back on Amazon Lily 2 years ago. I got at least some of my crew with me now, and Hancock isn't here to act weird. Luffy said with a laugh and drawing attention to him again. Act weird? Brûlée asked, raising an amused eyebrow at her son from her spot on his right side. Yeah, she couldn't make up her mind on what to do. First time I met her she tried using her powers on me and kept saying that it should work since I saw her naked, but her sisters said that maybe I was too scared for her powers to work right since there was no one alive who couldn't see her bare body and love her immediately. I don't get why seeing a woman naked makes you love her though. Luffy said, tilting his head to the side confused and causing everyone that heard to stop and stare at him while Brûlée's cup shattered in her grasp at hearing that her son saw someone naked. Brûlée's cup shattering drew even more attention to the spectacle and making everyone begin to quiet down in order to hear what had caused Brûlée to do that. Then after that she had me fight her pet cat and her sisters, and when I won she threw a banquet, but no one was singing there either until I started it. After that she called me to her room for a surprise. I thought it was meat, but she was naked again and acting all weird. Then after that she couldn't stop blushing when around me and kept asking me to marry her, but I don't know what that word means, so I kept telling her no, Luffy said, shrugging his shoulders slightly before spotting another piece of the rare meat dishes in the kingdom and grabbing it quickly. Boa Hancock was naked in front of you and asked you to marry her, but you said no? Sanji asked, twitching horribly as everyone stared at Luffy in shock or disbelief. Well, yeah. I don't know what marry means, so why would I agree? Luffy asked, confused and making his mother bang her head on the table in front of her. I don't know if I want to kill her, or try and knock some sense into my son. Brûlée said, torn between the options as she looked up at her siblings dismayed and making Luffy look even more confused. You are the shame of all men. Sanji said, despite how he was heavily crying and proclaiming that it wasn't fair as he collapsed on the floor. Reiju was gaping in shock at the straw hat wearing young man. Nami was pinching the bridge of her nose. Chopper was just as confused as Luffy, and Brook, he was just laughing. Sister Compote, can you please teach him about marriage and where babies come from? Brûlée asked, looking pleadingly at her oldest sister who choked on her drink at the request. Why me? Compote asked, looking startled and earning a look from Brûlée. You're the one who taught all this about babies and stuff except for Pero's knee, and that's only because he was older than you and already knew. Brûlée pointed out, making Compote pause for a second. True. But he's your son. Compote retorted, making all of the siblings numbers 10 and up for both boys and girls to give her a flat look, even Brûlée herself. You want Brûlée to try and teach someone about romance? Oven asked, raising an eyebrow at Compote, who opened her mouth and hesitated for a moment. Fair point. Compote admitted sheepishly and making Luffy look confused. What's romance? Can I eat it? Luffy asked, looking at his mother whose head hit the table again. You definitely take after your grandmother. Brule muttered to the wood of the table while Luffy looked at the others confused and then just shrugged and went back to eating. "You say that like it's a bad thing, Brule," Big Mom said, obviously having heard her daughter's remark. Brule didn't even look up at her mother or from the table at all really. "Mama, you don't want me to respond to that right now. So what's his position in the crew?" Parasparrow asked, looking at his siblings while staring amused at the party that the Straw Hats had restarted. "He seems to be more of a fighter than anything. Think we can have him be Brule's backup? She's not the outright strongest after all," Compote said, worried as always about her younger sister's lack of outright offensive power. Especially since she was the first line of defense for the family most of the time. "You'll be a great addition to the crew, grandson," Big Mom said, laughing as her grandson danced on the table and sang Bink's sake along with most of the younger siblings and his more childish crewmate. "Eh? Why would I want to join your crew?" Luffy asked, looking at Big Mom confused and making the party screech to a halt. "You're my grandson," Big Mom said automatically and making Luffy blink and tilt his head. "So what? My grandpa is a Marine, but I'm not joining them either," Luffy said, pointing out that fact and making everyone wince while Katakuri looked worried for his nephew. "Your mother is on my crew." Big Mom pointed that fact out right back, making Luffy look even more confused. "And my father is the leader of the revolutionaries, but I'm not joining them." Luffy countered that argument as he frowned at Big Mom. "Who you're born to doesn't matter. What your family is or has done does not matter. You're you and no one else. Do not let your family's past define who you are and what you do," Luffy said, sounding strangely wise as he quoted those words. "She may be my mom, and I'll admit it's nice to meet and get to know her and all the rest of my family, but I don't really know any of you. Never had the chance, and honestly that's fine with me. I'm happy with how my life has gone except for what happened at the War of Best." Luffy was uncharacteristically serious as he stared straight at Big Mom while speaking, everyone staring at him, but his gaze never wavered. "I grew up in a small village on Dawn Island in the Goa Kingdom. I stayed by myself with only Makino and a few friendly adults helping me survive in a lonely house my grandpa left me in by myself except for the times he'd come to visit and draw on me," Luffy began as he stared straight at Big Mom, his gaze never wavering. "I never knew I had a mom. I never knew I had a dad. I never knew I had aunts and uncles or a grandmother. Until I was 7 years old, all I knew was Makino, who was like a big sister. The fact that other children my age hated and feared me even before I ate my devil fruit. And that Shanks was like a cool big brother, father figure. When I was 7 years old, Gramps took me to the House of Mountain Bandits. He did that so that I would grow into a good, strong Marine," Luffy said, unbothered as his crew listened closely. They never really knew much about their captain's past and they respected his privacy, but since he was already telling everyone else. "My first night there I was only given one bowl of rice to eat, that's it. I was told that if I wanted to eat more food or eat at the table I had to learn how to be a bandit. I had to learn how to lie, steal, fight, and even kill people. Naturally I didn't listen to them. Instead I tried to make friends with the only other kid there. Portages d'Ace. He spat on me the first time we met, and for 3 months or so I starved while trying to follow him and make friends with him, and he only tried to kill me," Luffy said seriously and making Sanji wince at the mention of starving, as did some of the older siblings. "After finally becoming strong enough and surviving off of worms and random fruits or mushrooms I found in the forest, I managed to follow Ace all the way to his destination and met Sabo. They tied me to a tree and were planning on killing me to keep me quiet on the fact that they were stealing from some low-level thugs in the area to buy their own pirate ship. They were 10. Luffy continued, not even pausing, and now it seemed as if he were lost in his own memories. Brule was trembling a bit and moved as if to go to her son before Katakuri merely wrapped her in a hug. They were going to take me to a river and throw me in. I had eaten a devil fruit a few months before, so I'm sure you know how that would end. Before they could do that though, the pirate captain whose crew they had been stealing from found us. He took me back to their hiding place while Sabo and Ace ran and hid. He wanted me to tell them where Sabo and Ace hid their treasure, but I never said a word. I was tortured until nighttime, but I never said a word. They were about to kill me when Sabo and Ace arrived and took them out," Luffy said, and Brule had tears in her eyes at hearing that her son had been tortured at the age of 7. "After that we exchanged sake cups Ace stole from Dayton. That made them my big brothers. Within a year, however, we learned that Sabo wasn't an orphan like Ace was, or I thought I was. We learned his parents were still alive and nobles and they wanted their son back. They wanted him back enough that they threatened to kill me and Ace to do it. The nobles were also going to burn down the Grey Terminal, the trash heap just outside of the kingdom walls, because a celestial dragon was coming and they wanted his blessings. They promised that old pirate captain that they'd let him into the kingdom if he burnt down all the trash. This only happened after I was shot in the chest before I knew I was bullet resistant. I was still little at the time so it still hurt, but I didn't die. Luffy said, his eyes never wavering still, and instead they looked a bit glossy. Ace and I were forced by the pirate captain to carry the explosives used to set the terminal on fire around and plant them. Then he led us to where his ship had wrecked and set it on fire with us inside of it. After that I watched as the Grey Terminal, a place I played and learned and grew up a bit in, burned to the ground with people still living in it. I saw several people burned alive at the age of 8. The only reason Ace and I didn't die is because the bandits came looking for us. They found us and helped get me out of there while Dayton and Ace finished off the pirate captain. I'm literally rubber, completely rubber. When exposed to extreme heat, rubber melts. Now think about how it felt for someone made of rubber to be in the middle of an inferno. Luffy said, and by now Brûlé was all out sobbing and most of the siblings looked either grim or close to tears themselves. Luffy's crewmates were just plain horrified. A day later Ace and I are recovering in the bandits' shack when we're told that to escape from his parents Sabo was setting out to sea earlier than planned. He set out on a raft and sailed right in front of the celestial dragon's boat. One of the bandits saw him being shot down by the dragon. We all believed he was dead and he couldn't refute it given that he had been rescued by my dad and had amnesia. Luffy said, making the siblings wince a bit at hearing that. For the first 7 years of my life I was alone. Then I had 2 brothers, then within another year I had only 1 brother left. From then until me and my crew were recovering from Eni's lobby I thought that the only family member to care about me was my big brother Ace. Gramps only wanted us to be Marines. He didn't care what we wanted or how badly we were hurt during his training in Alabasta. Ace offered to let me and my crew join Whitebeard. Here Big Mom sucked in a sharp breath and her eyes grew a bit icy at hearing that. I refused without hesitation. I refused to call someone else my captain. 2 years ago during the War of the Best, I lost my big brother. Until Dressrosa I thought that was it. I was alone with no one that actually knew about or cared about me except for my crew. Then Sabo recovered his memories and found me. I had one of my brothers back and he had joined the revolutionaries. I never really met my dad but my big brother. Luffy trailed off a bit as he tilted his head at Big Mom so that his hat shadowed half of his face. I refused to join Whitebeard when who I thought family member left alive was part of the crew. I'm not going to join the revolutionaries even though my only remaining big brother is their second in command. Why would I join a woman I never met before? Luffy asked seriously as he stared down his grandmother. I don't know you. I don't fear you. I don't admire you. Honestly, you're a complete stranger to me, as is everyone here aside from my crewmates. Why would I want to join you? Luffy asked, and pretending not to know that several of his aunts had tears in their eyes while his uncles looked grim and his mother was all out bawling like a baby now. Even Big Mom looked grim and a bit upset over all that he had said. Yanji was just emotionless as he stared down at the floor, having enough sense not to say anything at the moment, while Reiju had tears in her eyes that she was fighting back heavily. Besides, here Luffy smiled a bit, although it was a little more forced than usual as he said something that had his crew giving forced laughs. They had honestly been waiting on him to finally tell his family about his dream. I'm going to be the king of pirates and that means I can't have a captain. Instead of having one person sailing under the other person's flag, why don't you make an alliance? Brook piped up before Nami could say or do anything to break the tense heavy silence between the two captains. Of course it was already broken enough by Brûlé's muffled sobbing into her brother's chest since he had yet to release her so that she could go to her son. Like with TRA guy? Luffy asked, turning from serious back to his normal personality in a heartbeat as he looked at Brook. Most of our alliances are sealed with marriages. Perospero pointed out even as he moved to try and help soothe Brûlé as well, or at least calm her down a little bit. Most of your alliances aren't with formerly missing family members. Nami pointed out dryly as she looked at them all. Young lady, we seem to have reached a conundrum. You wish for Luffy-san to join your crew like the rest of your family has. However, Luffy-san was raised away from you and has no reason to join your crew. Does he want to get to know his family? Yes, I'm quite sure he does. However, as of right now, he doesn't know much of anything about any of you. Luffy-san most likely does not wish to cut you all out of his life or let you all fight alone if he can help. That's just not the kind of man he is. But he will not join your crew. Brook summed things up pretty much as he looked straight at Big Mom, whose attention was on him now. An alliance seems to be the best bet we have at making sure everyone is happy. Luffy-san sees an alliance as less of a cooperative goal being reached for by two groups that have a common enemy, and more as of being friends. Now, as said earlier, he has a fleet in alliances with Lawson. Surely he would not mind one more alliance with family? After all, that means you all have an excuse to visit him or call him on Aramushi whenever you feel the need to. And he has an excuse to come back here and visit with you all while also helping you if you are attacked. Brook said, calling upon his years of knowledge as being a pirate. Even if a good many of those were spent alone in the darkness, in order to make this out to be the best choice available, which it kinda was in reality. Sure, we can be allies, and the next time someone tries to attack you I can come over and kick their butts. It'll be fun to take out marines or other pirates with new people. Luffy said, nodding his head in agreement and making a few of his aunts and uncles wince at the part about being new people to him. Fine, I'll see how this allies plan works out, but first you have to prove yourself. Big Mom finally admitted after a few minutes of silent thinking as everyone stared at her. How would I do that? Luffy asked, tilting his head at the large woman in front of him who smirked and looked at her children. Daifuku, Oven, and let's go with Compote. You have to fight the three of them at the same time and either pull out a tie or a win against them. Nothing lethal allowed, but anything else, well, it'll be a fight between pirates. Big Mom said, making the children she named stand, although they paused upon hearing why she called them. Not Katakuri ni? Flambe asked, upset she wouldn't get to see her beloved big brother fight her stupid-looking nephew. It'd be overkill if Katakuri ni went in. As it is right now, this is unfair to an extreme degree. After all, Daifuku Oni-san and Oven Oni-san are powerful enough on their own, but Compote Ne-chan is the closest one in Katakuri ni's league without being a sweet commander. Galette murmured, earning a nod from her twin, but Luffy didn't look bothered at all. Okay. Let's fight then, Luffy said, looking excited as he bounced slightly on his toes, grinning bright enough to rival even Prometheus. Are we going to be fighting too, Captain? Sanji asked, glancing up at his captain as he lit another cigarette. Nah, that's okay. I want to see how I stand up against some of my aunties and uncles anyways, Luffy said with a grin and a laugh while Nami looked decidedly worried. But these are pirates that are older than you and have a lot more training than you, and it's going to be 3-on. Nami began to list off, making Luffy laugh. That's what makes it fun. Besides, we took down CP9 and that earlobe guy and a bunch of other really strong pirates too, and we got stronger as a result. So if I fight them, that means that if they're stronger than me, I'll get stronger too, Luffy said, grinning brightly before hopping off of the table and landing on a man's lap as she stared at him. Look, now we're twins. Luffy laughed as he stretched his neck as well, his head hitting the brim of her hat. Amanda couldn't help but let her lips twitch into a small smile at this. Oh, I know. Trade hats with me, Luffy said as he reverted his neck back to normal and took off his straw hat. Taking away Amanda's large brimmed hat, Luffy put his on her head and then put her hat on his head. Luffy's crew blinked and then gaped a little bit at how easily he had traded hats with his aunt, who was blinking slowly for a moment. She. This is so cool, it keeps all the shade off of you and everything, Luffy said, laughing even as the hat sunk down over his head, the brim of it being large enough to block most of his upper body from view. Amanda's siblings watched wide-eyed as she blinked slowly and looked at the much smaller boy wearing the hat that was several times too big for him. That hat was one of her precious belongings that even her siblings hesitated to touch lest they risk evoking Amanda's cold fury towards themselves. Even Big Mom leaned forward in anticipation for what was going to happen next as her eyes locked on her eldest snake-neck child. No one could help but gasp or stare in shock as for the first time since she was a child, Amanda laughed loudly. The rest of the family was frozen and staring at the laughing woman in shock, but Luffy, he just laughed along with his aunt happily. Do you really want to do this, little nephew? Daifuku asked, glaring down at Luffy, who grinned up at him as he stood facing off against him, Oven, and Compote with his hat back on his head. They had all gotten done eating, and more than a few people were impressed by Luffy's huge appetite, and now they were standing in the training area reserved for the Charlotte family. Yep. Luffy agreed with a grin that was possibly 2/3 as bright as the sun, nearly blinding his uncles and aunt with the pure innocence of it. "We'll try not to hurt you too much," Daifuku said, smirking with a good bit of arrogance as he summoned forth his genie, earning a wide-eyed look from Luffy. "Cool. You have a guy sealed in your gut. Do you carry him around everywhere, or does he just pop out on his own, or?" Luffy was starry-eyed as he looked at the genie, earning a surprised look from both the genie and its master. "We're supposed to be fighting little nephew," Compote said, appearing behind Luffy with one black hand already in mid-swing. Luffy just coated his head in hockey and let the hit connect as he turned and punched her in the stomach and pushed her back a step. Brûlé had to be restrained by Smoothie to keep from rushing out there to stop the fight. "That kind of thing won't work on Compote Nay," Oven said as he moved to try and hit Luffy with one red-hot fist. Luffy just ducked under the punch and watched as Oven flew right into his sister, who barely dodged the punch. "Get him, Genie!" Daifuku cried as his genie tried to slash and smash Luffy, who jumped around like a monkey on crack as he dodged the wildly swinging genie. "Daifuku, watch what you're doing," Compote scolded when one of the slashes came a little too close to her for her comfort, although she didn't look too worried as her body turned black with hockey. "Unlike the boys here, I don't have a devil fruit, but that doesn't mean I don't have a few tricks of my own," Compote said as she punched at Luffy, who dodged the entirely black arm and went wide-eyed at the large hole left in the ground. "Whoa! That's so cool!" Luffy was amazed while Nami and Chopper looked terrified at the damage the woman had done with just one punch. "My observation isn't as strong as some of my siblings, but out of all us I have the strongest armament and inherited a watered-down version of Mama's iron body. I'm a lot sturdier than my two brothers here," Compote said, smirking as she held her hands up in a boxing-like stance as she stared down Luffy, who grinned at her. "Cool," Luffy said before there was a snarl from Daifuku that had Luffy jumping over the genie's attack, which went to hit Compote head-on, although she wasn't fazed by it. "I'm plenty sturdy, Nei-san," Daifuku snarled at his sister, who rolled her eyes a bit and resolved to talk to him later. "Gotcha," Oven said, appearing above Luffy and punching him down into the ground hard enough to make a crater. "That should take care of him," Daifuku said, pulling his genie back in with a scoff as he turned to leave the field, assuming his nephew was out cold after a hit like that. "Die," Compote tried to warn her brother, she really did, but by the time she had called his name, a rubber fist had slammed into his temple and knocked him out. Katakuri was shaking his head in disappointment since he had already moved to catch his brother and remove him from the battlefield. He should know better than to take his eyes off of an enemy before making sure he's down, Oven said, frowning at how his proud brother had been taken down, although perhaps this would make Daifuku remember to keep an eye on his enemy and his own ego. "I'll have to have a talk with him about that later," Compote said, frowning as well as she focused on Luffy, who was just standing unbothered in the crater. "Nice try. But you need to use hockey or your devil fruit if you want your punches to hurt me. I'm rubber after all," Luffy said cheerfully to Oven, who frowned but made his hands glow slightly as he heated them up with his powers. "Scorch fist," Oven said as he tried to hit Luffy in the head with his fists, looking to take out his nephew quickly now, only for Luffy to duck. Behind him was Compote, who was trying to take him out with a sneak punch to the head as well, only for her fist to hit Oven as his fist hit her. There was a crunching sound as Oven's hand broke when it connected with his elder sister's head, and another crunching sound when his sister's hockey-coated fist slammed into his jaw at the same moment. "Oven!" Compote was alarmed to see she had hit her slightly younger brother and sent him flying back like a skipping stone. "I'm alright," Oven groaned out as he stood up a bit wobbly, working his jaw with his good hand. "How did neither of you notice the other? Seriously, you're like 3 times my size, both of you. So how did you not see her trying to sneak up on me?" Luffy was confused by this as he looked at his orange-haired uncle, who glares at him while the rest of the family and Luffy's crewmates were muttering. "He has a point. Most of us tower over him by at least 4 to 5 feet, if not more," Amand pointed out, amused as Oven launched himself at Luffy, who jumped over him and onto Compote's shoulders. She tried to grab him only for him to swing around onto her back. "Oh, food. It's not meat, but it'll do," Luffy said, climbing up on Compote's neck and head and reaching into her hat. "Damn it, Luffy," Nami said, face palming, while several of the Charlottes couldn't help but to laugh. He's stealing her fruit in the middle of a fight," Cracker said, staring in disbelief while Compote tried grabbing her nephew, who seemed to twist around her hands before she could reach him. "Don't. Some of them are poisonous and others are explosives. Only I know which ones are safe to eat." Compote tried to warn her nephew, who stretched one hand into her line of sight holding a normal-looking apple. "Is this one okay?" Luffy asked as Compote finally pulled him around in front of her. "No, that's an explosive. This nay is safe for you to eat though," Compote said, her eyes softening as she reached up and grabbed a different apple. "Cool, I couldn't tell the difference. Thanks, Auntie," Luffy said, tossing the exploding apple over his shoulder casually and taking a bite out of the safe one. Whether it was just a happy accident or completely on purpose, no one could tell, but the exploding apple hit Oven right in the face. "Huh?" Luffy looked around to see what blew up, and only seeing Oven laid out flat several yards away from the force of the explosion. The heat of it didn't bother the Heat Man obviously, but the conclusive force, the shrapnel, and the sheer shock of the unexpected blow damaged him greatly. "Oven." Compote looked worried for her brother, but she didn't release her grip on Luffy, who had stolen another apple. "Wait, that news poison?" Compote asked, more than said at the end, as Luffy ate it looking completely fine, not bothered at all by the toxic poison within. That apple tasted funny. Maybe 'cause I eat meat more than fruit." Luffy was completely unbothered by the poison, making Compote's jaw drop slightly alongside a few other siblings. "There was enough poison in that to kill 5 people in one bite," Compote said in disbelief as she stared at Luffy in shock and horror, making him tilt his head. Poison?" Luffy asked, looking confused at her before Daifuku and his genie rejoined the fight, and boy did they look pissed. "You little brat. I'm going to enjoy putting you in your place and making you and your crew join us by force. Forget being the Pirate King or any other stupid dream you and your idiot crew have. You'll be nothing but servants when I'm done with you," Daifuku roared as his genie lunged at the prone-looking Luffy. "Oh no," Brook said, looking worried even though he was moving to pull his sword from his cane. "Don't insult my crew or our dreams," Luffy said, his voice gone darker all of a sudden as he turned to glare at Daifuku. "Oh, he's done it now," Nami said, shaking her head slightly at the man's arrogance. "And are you going to do about it, brat? You and your worthless crew of pathetic dreamers aren't going to Daifuku was cut off by a pure black foot slamming into his jaw. "I can't watch," Chopper said, pulling his hat down while Sanji blew out a trail of smoke. His words echoed around the dangerously silent area and causing more than a few Charlottes to look confused or scoff. Very few looked like they believed the blonde cook. Reiju, Yanji, Brule, Katakuri, Carrot, and Pedro just looked intrigued, and Perispero and Amand looked amused more than anything. "He's done fucked up now. This is going to be a slaughter. Gear second," Luffy said, stretching his legs to pump the blood since his arms were caught by his aunt. "What the?" Compote dropped Luffy, surprised when the genie hit her, along with the sudden burning from her now glowing pink nephew. "Gum Gum Jet Pistol," Luffy said as he slammed his fist into Oven, who was trying to hit him now that he is upright and Luffy was free from Compote. The punch landed square in Oven's face and sent him skidding back. "That won't work on me," Daifuku snarled as his genie lunged at Luffy again, only for Luffy to dodge as he jumped high up in the air. "Gear third," Luffy said as he bit his thumb, blowing air into it and making it grow bigger and bigger. His hands larger than a giant's. Big Mom gasped in disbelief as they all stared in shock, Daifuku going a bit pale when he saw the now large fist above him. "Gum Gum Giant Rifle," Luffy yelled as he slammed his fist down where Daifuku was, a dark, dangerous look on his face that surprised his relatives since he had been so happy just a moment ago, and the look on his face had some of them tensing out of reflex. This thing is ridiculously strong," Compote said, barely managing to keep the fist from slamming into her brother as she held her arms up to stop it, her arms coated in haki and shaking horribly as she stood in front of her younger brother. She ended up breathing hard, and her feel had dug into the ground hard enough to leave mini craters when Luffy finally pulled away his fist, but it remained large. Katakuri's face went a bit pale as he saw something about to happen. "Watch out, Compote Nay," Katakuri yelled the warning as Luffy's giant fist turned pitch black with haki. Compote went wide-eyed and quickly jumped out of the way, Daifuku having long since jumped away from that spot once his sister had saved his hide. There was a large long hole drilled deep into the ground by the pitch-black fist for a moment, and when the fist was removed there wasn't a single stone out of place. It was all perfectly ground to dust into a clean crater. Huh. I'm surprised he didn't do worse, Nami said, a bit surprised and making the now gaping in shock and horror family members to stare at her in disbelief. He can do worse, but that would have even taken me out if it hit head-on, Cracker said, alarmed and pale as he stared at the damage Luffy's giant fist had done to the ground. Possibly me as well, Smoothie said, wide-eyed even as she held Brûlée still, despite the woman not struggling anymore and instead gaping at her son's power. Looks like he's about to use that move, Sanji said, noting something with his own haki and putting out his cigarette as he moved to back a little further away from the field. You can spit on me, laugh at me, hit me, mock me in my dream all you want. I don't care. I'll just laugh it off, Luffy yelled to Daifuku, who was looking rather pale at how much he had pissed off his now very dangerous-looking nephew, quickly sum out his genie to try and hold off his nephew till he collapsed. But the minute you attack or mock my nakama, that's when I'll get pissed off, Luffy said, stretching his still large and black fist back and making more than a few siblings scream or yelp when it caught on fire. Gum gum giant red hawk, Luffy roared as he slammed the giant flaming fist straight into the charging genie and his uncle, knocking them clear out of the arena and possibly to the other side of the island. Threatening my nakama is not a good idea, Luffy said, turning to the other two combatants that looked rather pale and horrified at how easily he had just taken down Daifuku, although they were relieved when his hand shrunk back down to its normal size. Gum gum, Red Hawk Gatling, Luffy shot out both of his flaming fists so fast it seemed as if they multiplied as they slammed into oven. The heat didn't bother him really, the fact that it was fire didn't bother him much, but multiple flame and haki-coated fists slamming into him rapidly over and over when he was already wounded a good bit. Yeah, that knocked him down and out. And people's dreams never end, Luffy yelled, making Nami's breath catch at that while Luffy turned to Compote with his face still set in stone. You're stronger than them, Gear 4th, Luffy said, huffing slightly as he took on his Gear 4th form, making even his crewmates look shocked at it. Apple Palooza, Compote yelled, throwing several exploding apples at Luffy, who didn't look afraid in the least. Kong Gun, Luffy countered with his own attack, hitting the apples and making them blow up before they even made it halfway to the rest of him. Compote barely had time to bring her arms up in a guard in front of her face before the large black fist hit and pushed her several yards back before her guard broke. Ah! Compote gasped out a bit of saliva and a bit of blood as she was knocked right into her mother from the force of the hit. No one threatens my crew or mocks their dreams, Luffy snarled dangerously as he glared down everyone else, using Soru to appear in front of his friends and crew protectively. It's okay, Luffy. They aren't going to do it anymore, Nami said, trying to calm down her captain while Katakuri and Amand walked over quickly as a few other siblings checked on the downed fighters. It's alright, little nephew. You did it. You won, Katakuri said calmly to his nephew while Amand took a more direct approach. She walked right up to Luffy unafraid and grabbed his hat. Reaching up, Amand took off her own hat and gently placed it on his head while putting his hat on her own head. You won. Rest now, Amand said with a small hiss to her words as she stared Luffy right in his eyes, showing her own slit-pupilled eyes that were like a snake's. Smiling gently at her nephew, who was beginning to power down from his Gear 4th, Amand bared her poisonous snake fangs at her nephew and let her forked tongue poke out enough for him to see it. Luffy smiled a bit as he swayed just a little bit, emotions and fighting and maybe a bit of the poison taking its toll on him. Amand just chuckled a bit and caught him when he said one thing before passing out for a little while. That's so cool, morning sleepyhead, Brûlée said, smiling softly as she stroked her son's hair back a bit as he began to wake up. Mornin', Mom, Luffy grumbled before he turned over and buried his face in the warmth, curling and wrapping around it. Brûlée smiled brighter than she had in years as her son called her mom and curled up into her. I know you want to sleep, baby, but it's time to get up, Brûlée said softly as she ran her fingers through her son's hair. Don't wanna, Luffy whined pitifully as he pulled his suddenly larger than normal hat down further. Here, I got this, Nami said to Brûlée, who looked torn between wanting to wake her son up or let him sleep some more. Luffy, Sanji's got breakfast ready, and if you don't hurry we're going to eat it all, Nami said, moving out of the way and watching amused as Luffy jumped up with a yelp and dashed for his cook. They didn't eat it all, did they? Luffy demanded of Sanji, looking scared of the answer and not calming down until the brim of the hat he was wearing sunk down over his head. Blinking slightly, Luffy looked up at his hat only to see that he was wearing a man's hat still. Looking around curiously, Luffy noticed most of his aunts and uncles chuckling bit or glaring at Nami for some reason while Amand was still wearing his signature hat. "Welcome back to the waking world, little nephew. Can I have my hat back now?" Amand asked, amused as she smiled at Luffy, who grinned and swapped their hats easily without moving off of his cook. "Thank you, and don't worry. There's still plenty of food," Amand said, nodding towards the table that was loaded down with all sorts of sweets aside from one spot where there were normal breakfast foods and meats set up, made by Sanji himself this morning. "You kinda zonked out after the fight, so after I checked on you, they brought us all back to the castle so everyone could get some rest. Sanji and I shared a room while Nami had her own room, and you apparently were comfortable cause you stayed right here in this room sleeping on the floor with your head in your mom's lap," Chopper said from where he was seated next to where Brûlé was getting off of the floor, amused at her son's appetite as he appeared in one of the chairs so fast that even Katakuri took a minute to realize he had moved. "Like when I fall asleep on Robin?" Luffy asked, a piece of ham already halfway to his mouth and making Nami sigh a bit while Sanji grit his teeth before taking a deep breath. "Yes, Luffy. Like when you fall asleep on Robin's lap," Nami said, making Luffy reach a now empty hand up to his head and rifle through his hair for a minute before looking confused. "Robin Swan's not here, so she didn't place any flowers in your hair while you were sleeping, Captain," Sanji said, making Luffy blink a bit before tilting his head. "That's weird. Whenever I wake up there's always flowers in my hair after they opened up all pretty," Luffy said, earning fond smiles from his crewmates before Brook drew Luffy's attention. "Ah, but the flowers here talk and feel like we do, Luffy-san. We would not want to hurt them by taking them away from their home, would we?" Brook asked, looking at his captain, who went wide-eyed at this in amazement. "Really? Your flowers talk and everything?" Luffy asked, looking at his mother and aunts and uncles nearby wide-eyed in curiosity and awe. "Yes, they do. Mama's power enables them to have their own souls, which brings them to life," Parasparrow said, nodding to his nephew, whose eyes seemed to grow bigger and rounder at this in amazement. "Do they poop?" Luffy asked curiously, causing half of his aunts and uncles to choke as well as his grandmother. Brûlé spluttered a bit in disbelief. The man just quirked an eyebrow, and Daifuku slammed his head onto the table alongside Oven. Kampo just laughed loudly at the others' reactions, even as Luffy's crewmates aside from Brook slammed their hands into their foreheads. Brook just laughed as well. To think this was the boy who beat up 3 almost sweet commander-level Charlottes. "Luffy, why do you ask that about everyone and everything you meet? You asked Kami. You asked Brook?" Nami shouted after hitting Luffy on the head, earning a death glare from Brûlé and Amand both. "Bekau." Luffy began to actually answer that question, making Nami's eyebrow twitch as she grabbed a piece of meat nearby and shoved it into his mouth. She didn't want to know. "I changed my mind, I don't want to know the answer," Nami yelled, making Luffy swallow the meat and then just smile at her. "Oh, okay. You're weird, Nami," Luffy said, laughing a bit before going back to his meal, completely unbothered by anything that just happened. "I don't want to hear you of all people calling me or anyone else weird," Nami yelled at Luffy again, her eyebrow twitching horribly, and she was ready to just take out her upgraded climate baton and smack him with it. "I wouldn't try and hit him again if I were you," a man's voice said coldly from behind Nami as she flicked a bit of her sword out with clear intent to draw and use it. "Huh?" Nami turned to look at the snake-neck woman curiously, only to pale and eep a bit at how close the taller woman was and how cold she looked as she gripped her sword by the hilt while staring down at Nami. "Hit him again and you'll lose that hand," Amand simplified, making Nami go pale white and a bit of what seemed to be her soul leave her body while Sanji stepped over closer to her protectively. "I don't hit women. Never have, never will. But I will get in the way of you trying to hurt Nami Swan," Sanji said, making Luffy look up interested while Brook was drawing his guitar from out of nowhere. "Eh? Are you about to spar with Auntie like you do with Zoro, Sanji? I thought you'd never hit a woman even if it killed you?" Luffy asked, looking at his cook confused and with a piece of bacon hanging out of his mouth a bit. "You're right, Captain. I won't hit a woman, but I also won't let her hit a crewmate," Sanji said even though his gaze never left Amanda. Huh? Auntie, why are you going to hit my crew? Luffy asked, looking at Amanda now confused and a bit alarmed, making her look at him and her face to soften a bit. She hit you, Amanda said, making Luffy blink before looking at Nami, who was pretty pale and reaching for her baton. Oh, you mean Nami? Don't worry about that. She does it all the time when me and Zoro are about to do something stupid. I'm rubber though, so it doesn't usually hurt, but I think she learned Gramps' fist of love thing, cause sometimes it really hurts, but that's only when I'm about to do something she says is too stupid for words. Luffy said casually and with a grin on his face, making Amanda frown a little but slowly put her sword back into its sheath, even though she had only drawn it by about an inch or so. You were trying to dive into the water to pick a fight with a sea cow, Nami said, scowling at her captain as she remembered the most recent bout of stupidity he had before they arrived here. That stupid thing was making me hungry. Luffy whined pitifully to his navigator, whose hand twitched as if to hit him again. Have you forgotten that you can't swim and that you will drown if we don't fish you out of the water? Nami hissed at her captains, whose family were gaping at him in horror and shock, while Katakuri didn't look surprised. He had been there for that after all. Nah, I know I will, but I'm not worried. I trust my crew not to let me drown, Luffy said with a bright smile that had his crew members pausing before they each smiled softly and relaxed a bit more, Chopper nuzzling into Luffy's neck as he climbed up onto the rubber boy's lap. Brook let out a small laugh and began to strum his guitar a bit, while Sanji just ruffled Luffy's hair and Nami patted his head. You idiot, Nami said fondly, even as she still smiled at him, shaking her head a bit, while the Charlottes were amazed at how much Luffy trusted his crew, and how his crew reacted to him saying that he trusted them. Your son is something else, little sister, Amanda whispered to Brûlé, who was right beside her. Wakto Brook and asked for music, causing the musician to laugh and begin playing Bing Sake. Brûlé's eyes were shiny with tears and her smile was sad but loving as she watched her son draw the whole family into singing along with the skeleton. Once again he turned the meal into a party, and it seemed that it was becoming something of a habit for the entire family to get in on it. I know, Sister Amanda. So you won't join us, but you can ally with us. That will be acceptable, Big Mom said, making Luffy grin up at her brightly before turning to Brook. Music, Luffy called, earning a laugh from the skeleton, who strummed up his guitar again. Which song now, Luffy-san? Brook asked, making Luffy grin wider than many thought possible as he bounced in his seat a bit. It must be easy to grin so widely when you were able to stretch. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Won't even catch my breath. And I know the weight of the world can crush my chest. Luffy began to sing, making the skeleton laugh and begin to strum his guitar as he and Luffy sang the song. It's not because I'm fat. It's not cause of money. Work's in my blood and I kill cause I'm hungry. Luffy shouted the lyrics as the rest of the family that knew the song began singing along. You have strange tastes in music, Luffy, Nami said, sighing slightly as Luffy and his family finished up the song, while it seemed that he had started up another party by complete accident. Something that Katakuri had noticed was a common thing with his nephew. Mountain bandits, Sanji reminded Nami, who let out an "ah" as the chef put some more meat before his captain, who gave a happy cry and began to gobble it down. Save SS some for me, Amanda said, hissing slightly at her nephew, whose eyes turned to stars at the reappearance of the hissing, lisp, and the forked tongue as his aunt stole some meat from his plate, a rare treat for the woman in the predominantly candy kingdom. Cool, Luffy said, clambering into her lap and staring up at her awestruck, earning a soft hissing chuckle and softer smile from the normally cold and distant woman. Amanda's unique even amongst my snake-neck children, Linlin said, smiling slightly as she watched her grandson giggle when Amanda's forked tongue stuck out and licked him affectionately as she rubbed her cheek against his head. She is more snake in some ways than she is human, and has more than just the snake neck part going for her. She is venomous, she has a snake's tongue, and her eyes can turn into that of a snake's sometimes as well. It's quite unique and rare for those traits to show up, Linlin explained proudly when Nami and Chopper looked confusedly at the eldest of the snake necks. Venomous? Do you need some anti-venom? It can't be good to have venom in your blood? Chopper asked, looking worried as he tugged lightly on Amanda's dress to get her attention. I am naturally immune to my own venom and any weaker than it, Amanda assured the reindeer doctor, who relaxed a little at this. Amanda was a little confused at how worried the talking raccoon seemed to be. glancing at her nephew in her lap. Amanda figured it was just because the little doctor wanted to make sure his captain's aunt was okay. Cool, you're poison-proof like me. Oh, but you were born with it. I got it cause of that Maggie guy with the stupid venom power. Luffy said, snuggling close to his aunt and looking happy that he had something in common with at least one of his family members, besides his gender or his dark hair at least. Maggie? Do you mean Magellan? The Impel Down Warden? Parasparrow asked, looking at his nephew alarmed and earning a nod from Luffy. Maggie. Luffy agreed, nodding his head again as if he was unaware that the man had a full name. How did you survive his venom fruit? Oven asked in shock as he stared at Luffy, who just shrugged. Bon-chan and Eva-chan. Luffy said as if that explained everything, which it did to him but not to anyone else. Well, if he survived the venom fruit, then no wonder my homemade poisoned apples don't have any effect on him. Compote said, swallowing heavily while Sanji seemed to have paled drastically. Eva, please tell me that's not Ivankov? Sanji asked weakly and making Luffy look at him wide-eyed. You know Eva-chan? Luffy asked brightly to his cook, who flinched and curled into the fetal position while the Big Mom pirates looked a bit startled. You know the revolutionary Ivankov? Big Mom asked, staring at her grandson surprised. Uh-huh. He saved me and impelled down and helped me escape and helped me at Marineford too. Eva-chan is my friend. Luffy said, smiling brightly, although his eyes were a bit flinty when he spoke about it. Immune to poisons, huh? Then what about that poisonous fish that you ate? Reiju asked, looking at Luffy, who blinked as he remembered that she was there. It made my stomach hurt. That was all. Besides, it tasted nasty. Luffy said, scrunching up his nose before his hand shot out and he stole a tea cake from Nami's plate, yanking his hand back just before she stabbed a fork through it. That seemed to set off the usual Straw Hat meal routine. The Charlottes and Germa present watched in disbelief as Luffy stole food from everyone's plates, his crew defending their own plates with expert timing, skill and ease, while the Charlottes hurried to protect their own food. Why are you stealing food? There's plenty to go around. Amanda asked as she looked at the boy who had yet to leave her lap and in fact seemed like he didn't even notice that he was still sitting on her. You gotta eat fast if you want to eat at all. There's no telling when you'll be attacked or when someone will steal your food. Luffy said, shrugging slightly and looking confused as to why she didn't already know that. Gramps had taught him an ace that back when Luffy was little. I'm chalking that up to him living with mountain bandits. Nami said dryly as she slapped away Luffy's grasping hand again without even looking. Since he's poison-proof, then perhaps we can arrange a marriage to poisoned pink Reiju. Big Mom said, looking at the pink-colored Germa Royal, who went slightly wide-eyed at this. What a marriage? Hancock kept asking me about marrying her, but I never asked her what that meant. Luffy asked, tilting his head curiously while Brûlé twitched. You fall in love with someone and end up staying with them forever and having kids. Daifuku said, still glaring at his nephew for his humiliating defeat at the hands of the much smaller male. Huh. I wonder why Hancock wants kids then. Luffy said with a frown as he thought about that and earning a heavy twitch from Sanji and Yanji, as well as some of his uncles. No kids for you, young man. Brûlé said instantly as she stared sternly at her son, earning looks from the others. Don't you want grandchildren, Brûlé? Parasparrow asked his sister, who faltered a bit. Well, yes, eventually, but my baby is only 19 and I just got him back. Let my baby stay innocent and naive for at least a little while, Brûlé said, earning a snort from her mother which drew Brûlé's attention. I had Parasparrow when I was 18 and Compote when I was 19. Big Mom pointed out to Brûlé, whose head swung around to look at Luffy with her eyes narrowed. That reminds me, when you find a nice woman to start a family with, you'd better not have a new child every year, Brûlé said sternly to her son, who was just blinking at her confused. Okay. Luffy agreed with a shrug before turning back to his food when Amanda stole a piece of ham from his plate. Well, technically their plate, since he was still on her lap, but technicalities meant nothing to him. Amanda nearly choked on the stolen food at the next words out of Luffy's mouth as he stole some bacon from Yanji's plate. Luffy was the last person with any right to say something like that. Moms are weird. Can we keep him, Mama? I like my adorable little nephew. Amanda asked, pouting slightly as she hugged Luffy close when her nephew was talking about how he was ready to leave with his friends. Why don't you come with us? I think you would have a lot of fun fighting with Zoro. Luffy said with a grin up at his aunt who looked at her mother hopefully. She liked being around her little nephew. He was funny and clueless and yet incredibly strong as well. He also wasn't scared by how ruthless and sadistic she could be, like her younger siblings and other nieces and nephews were. Mom can come too, Luffy said, moving to latch onto his mom. He was quite simply a mama's boy. One who saw no shame in what he was and no reason to be ashamed of it as he cuddled with his mother and hugged her whenever he wanted to. It would be a good idea in theory, Mama, Brule said, smiling as she ran her fingers through her son's hair before looking up at her mother. Explain. Big Mom ordered her daughter, who kept one arm wrapped around her son who was snuggled contently into her side. Well, not only will having two of your children aboard his ship show that he is allied with you, but you've been trying to find a way to help train the younger members of the family into minister and combatant roles recently. Since most of the positions are already taken, however, there's a shortage of things for them to try and do in order to further their skills. Brule pointed out this, making Big Mom nod her head. Most of her younger children were becoming cooks simply because they couldn't compare to their older siblings' strength or abilities, and there were no free islands for them to govern. Well, if you have two, well, technically four, open positions, then they'll be able to try and take over those positions to further their own skills and gather the necessary real-life experience that they've been missing out on, Brule said, making Big Mom look at her confused. Explain this. Big Mom ordered, looking interested as she stared at Brule, who didn't bat an eye. Simple. Sister Amand is one of the best sword wielders in the family, the minister of Nuts Island, and one of the ones who is usually sent on ingredient hunts due to her combat prowess. If she is no longer available here because she is traveling with Luffy-chan, that leaves 3 open positions. That will give my younger siblings, nieces, and nephews incentive to further their swordsmanship in order to take her place as the best sword wielder. It will leave an open slot on ingredient hunts or extermination missions for one of them to fill in order to further their combat prowess. Not to mention, it will leave Nuts Island without a minister that will have to be selected soon, and they will learn the intricacies on how to run an island in a relatively easy to run island. No offense to you, sister, Brule said, nodding to her older sister at the end and earning a snort. None taken. I set things up so that Nuts Island would be simple and easy to run for when I'm busy with missions, and so that I would have plenty of time to keep my skills sharp, Amand said, earning blinks from the other ministers who were also combatants, before they began swearing when they realized that they never thought of doing that. How could they have never thought of setting up their island so that it would be easier to run in combat and mission emergencies? With me gone, that will leave the seducing woods without a leader. You bereft your best spy, the position of head communications open, and the position of ambush expert open. Although to be fair, I believe that Monty Dore is already doing a good job as a communications expert, so that position would not be empty for long. Him taking over that, however, means that we'd need to train up another communications expert to take his place while he takes mine. Brule pointed out that as she glanced over at her scribe brother, who gave her a surprised look. That leaves a leadership position of a relatively easy to run area open for someone to take over. That also means some of the young ones will have the chance to take over some of my spying missions to further their own skills in the art to see who would be the next head spy of the family. Some of the little ones also show aptitude in ambush tactics, so with me no longer here to do that, they'll be able to further those skills as well. Brule counted them off on her fingers for a moment before her hand fell back to her son's head, where she ruffled his soft black locks for a moment. So not only will the two of us going with the Straw Hats ensure that it is known that such a formidable rookie has powerful allies and contacts, but it will also allow some of the younger ones to train harder and get more experience so that your forces are altogether stronger and harder to defeat should the next person try to invade your island. Brule summarized, and there was a full moment of silence before Brule's eyebrow twitched when she noticed that both her son and her mother were asleep. Apparently they had fallen asleep halfway through her explanation. Mama? Parasparrow warily poked his mother with the end of his candy can, causing her to blink back awake. Hawa. Oh. Big Mom said, blinking as she recalled hearing Brule give some detailed and probably thought-out explanation on why it would be a good idea for her and Amand to leave with her grandson. Sounds good. You two have my permission to leave. Parasparrow, Compo, to arrange everything to find who is best to take over their spots while they're gone, Big Mom said, pretending she had heard every word and making Brule twitch slightly. You didn't even hear half of what I said, did you? Brûlé asked, earning a shake of the head from her mother. Huh? Luffy woke up blinking at his mother, who twitched again as she looked down at her son. You take after your grandmother, don't you? Brûlé asked, making Luffy blink and yawn at the same time as Big Mom did. Luffy drowsily detangled himself from his mother and launched himself up onto his grandmother's lap, curling up like a kitten. Sorry, Mom. I was tired. Luffy said, smiling sleepily even as he rubbed his eye with the back of his wrist. At the same time his grandmother was rubbing at her own eyes. I can't tell if he's just that much like her, or if he's just being a little shit to everyone right now. Sanji muttered to Nami, who gave a small snort of agreement. Yo ho ho ho. If you're tired, Luffy-san, let me play you a lullaby, Brook said happily as he began playing a soft melody on his violin before anyone could stop him. My son takes after my mother too much for my sanity, Brûlé said, her eye twitching again when the first few notes of the lullaby had both her son and her mother falling asleep. Your new world born and bred, Brûlé, Amanda said, smiling slightly as she threw an arm around her younger sister's shoulders. So what? Brûlé asked, confused by why her sister was bringing that up. It was a sad fact that none of them could argue with Amanda's words. That means that much like the sea we live in, you never had any sanity. To be fair, the rest of us are just as bad. Can we keep him, Mama? I like my adorable little nephew. Amanda asked, pouting slightly as she hugged Luffy close when her nephew was talking about how he was ready to leave with his friends. Why don't you come with us? I think you would have a lot of fun fighting with Zoro, Luffy said with a grin up at his aunt, who looked at her mother hopefully. She liked being around her little nephew. He was funny and clueless and yet incredibly strong as well. He also wasn't scared by how ruthless and sadistic she could be, like her younger siblings and other nieces and nephews were. Mom can come too, Luffy said, moving to latch onto his mom. He was quite simply a mama's boy. One who saw no shame in what he was and no reason to be ashamed of it, as he cuddled with his mother and hugged her whenever he wanted to. It would be a good idea in theory, Mama, Brûlé said, smiling as she ran her fingers through her son's hair before looking up at her mother. Explain. Big Mom ordered her daughter, who kept one arm wrapped around her son, who was snuggled contently into her side. Well, not only will having two of your children aboard his ship show that he is allied with you, but you've been trying to find a way to help train the younger members of the family into minister and combatant roles recently. Since most of the positions are already taken, however, there's a shortage of things for them to try and do in order to further their skills. Brûlé pointed out this, making Big Mom nod her head. Most of her younger children were becoming cooks simply because they couldn't compare to their older siblings' strength or abilities, and there were no free islands for them to govern. Well, if you have two, well, technically four, open positions, then they'll be able to try and take over those positions to further their own skills and gather the necessary real-life experience that they've been missing out on, Brûlé said, making Big Mom look at her confused. Explain this, Big Mom ordered, looking interested as she stared at Brûlé, who didn't bat an eye. Simple. Sister Amanda is one of the best sword wielders in the family, the minister of Nuts Island, and one of the ones who is usually sent on ingredient hunts due to her combat prowess. If she is no longer available here because she is traveling with Luffy-chan, that leaves 3 open positions. That will give my younger siblings, nieces, and nephews incentive to further their swordsmanship in order to take her place as the best sword wielder. It will leave an open slot on ingredient hunts or extermination missions for one of them to fill in order to further their combat prowess. Not to mention, it will leave Nuts Island without a minister that will have to be selected soon, and they will learn the intricacies on how to run an island in a relatively easy to run island. No offense to you, sister, Brûlé said, nodding to her older sister at the end and earning a snort. None taken. I set things up so that Nuts Island would be simple and easy to run for when I'm busy with missions, and so that I would have plenty of time to keep my skills sharp, Amanda said, earning blinks from the other ministers who were also combatants, before they began swearing when they realized that they never thought of doing that. How could they have never thought of setting up their island so that it would be easier to run in combat and mission emergencies? With me gone, that will leave the seducing woods without a leader. You bereft your best spy, the position of head communications open, and the position of ambush expert open. Although to be fair, I believe that Monty Dore is already doing a good job as a communications expert, so that position would not be empty for long. Him taking over that, however, means that we'd need to train up another communications expert to take his place while he takes mine. Brule pointed out that as she glanced over at her scribe brother who gave her a surprised look. That leaves a leadership position of a relatively easy-to-run area open for someone to take over. That also means some of the young ones will have the chance to take over some of my spying missions to further their own skills in the art to see who would be the next head spy of the family. Some of the little ones also show aptitude in ambush tactics, so with me no longer here to do that, they'll be able to further those skills as well. Brule counted them off on her fingers for a moment before her hand fell back to her son's head where she ruffled his soft black locks for a moment. So not only will the two of us going with the Straw Hats ensure that it is known that such a formidable rookie has powerful allies and contacts, but it will also allow some of the younger ones to train harder and get more experience so that your forces are altogether stronger and harder to defeat should the next person try to invade your island. Brule summarized, and there was a full moment of silence before Brule's eyebrow twitched when she noticed that both her son and her mother were asleep. Apparently they had fallen asleep halfway through her explanation. "Mama?" Parasparrow warily poked his mother with the end of his candy can, causing her to blink back awake. "Hawa. Oh," Big Mom said, blinking as she recalled hearing Brule give some detailed and probably thought-out explanation on why it would be a good idea for her and a man to leave with her grandson. "Sounds good. You two have my permission to leave. Parasparrow, Compote arrange everything to find who is best to take over their spots while they're gone," Big Mom said, pretending she had heard every word and making Brule twitch slightly. "You didn't even hear half of what I said, did you?" Brule asked, earning a shake of the head from her mother. "Huh?" Luffy woke up blinking at his mother, who twitched again as she looked down at her son. "You take after your grandmother, don't you?" Brule asked, making Luffy blink and yawn at the same time as Big Mom did. Luffy drowsily detangled himself from his mother and launched himself up onto his grandmother's lap, curling up like a kitten. "Sorry, Mom. I was tired," Luffy said, smiling sleepily even as he rubbed his eye with the back of his wrist. At the same time his grandmother was rubbing at her own eyes. "I can't tell if he's just that much like her, or if he's just being a little shit to everyone right now," Sanji muttered to Nami, who gave a small snort of agreement. "Yo-ho-ho-ho. If you're tired, Luffy-san, let me play you a lullaby," Brook said happily as he began playing a soft melody on his violin before anyone could stop him. "My son takes after my mother too much for my sanity," Brule said, her eye twitching again when the first few notes of the lullaby had both her son and her mother falling asleep. "Your new world born and bred, Brule," Amanda said, smiling slightly as she threw an arm around her younger sister's shoulders. "So what?" Brule asked, confused by why her sister was bringing that up. It was a sad fact that none of them could argue with Amanda's words. "That means that much like the sea we live in, you never had any sanity. To be fair, the rest of us are just as bad." "Hi," Luffy said, waving at the rest of the party with a grin on his face that was as wide as the sky and as bright as the sun. Most of those not part of the Charlotte family blushed a bit at the bright grin on his face as they stared at the boy who was so at ease with the large fearsome Yonko. "You were literally just announced a prince of Mama's empire, and you just say, hi," Brule said, face palming at her son's actions and causing him to blink over at her, clueless. "What else would I say?" Luffy asked, tilting his head to the side, confused, and causing Brule to calmly walk over to her brother. Once she reached Katakuri's side, she buried her face in his leather jacket and released a muffled scream before pulling away. "Feel better?" Nami asked, stepping over to pat Brule on the back as the tall woman nodded her head while her brother rubbed her back soothingly. "Get used to doing that multiple times a day," Sanji said, lighting another cigarette and offering Amanda a light when she pulled out a fresh cigarette as well. She had the feeling that she was going to be smoking more around her nephew than ever before. "Why?" Brule asked, her eyes snapping to her son's crewmates, who looked at each other. "Should we tell her or wait until something happens and she sees it for herself?" Chopper asked, looking at the others a bit curious as to how to explain it to the woman. "Let Em experience it firsthand," Nami said with a small cackle as she threw back her shot of liquor, and the cackle had a few chills going down the spines of those nearby. She sounded more like a witch than Brule ever could. Even Brule would admit to fearing for her title of Mirror Witch. Right then, given the positively witch-like cackle Nami had given as Smoothie refilled her glass. "There's no way to explain Luffy-san properly. Best for them to learn from experience." "Yo-ho-ho-ho." Brook laughed, which earned a few startled jumps from those who thought he was just a prop of some kind. After all, it wouldn't the strangest decoration that they've ever seen at one of Big Mom's tea parties. She was known to have some rather unique designs every once in a while. Especially with her fascination for unique or one-of-a-kind rare objects and animals. If he's anything like my sister was when she was younger, then I'm going to be needing a lot more cigarettes and alcohol. The man said with a sigh as she exhaled a puff of smoke and earning a sympathetic look from Sanji as well as an offered second cigarette. She gratefully took the nicotine stick of cancer and waited until the one in her mouth was down to the last bit before she threw it away and put the second one in, letting Sanji light it up for her. Even if it meant she had to lean her long neck way down. On the plus side, things are never boring with him around. Nami offered with a smile and another small snicker as she threw back another pint of liquor as if it were rum. It wasn't, but damn if she wasn't going to be trying to get drunk off of it. Smoothie helpfully refilled her glass for her again. She could tell that the navigator definitely needed some drinks, which would explain why the girl was sticking close to her. True. The rest of the Straw Hats present agreed in an instant with nods of their own and small smiles of remembrance of one incident or another. And hey, we always end up getting stronger and stronger and able to protect each other better, Sanji said with a smirk as he looked at the others who nodded in agreement and then all raised their cups in unison before tossing them back as one. He still tries to make our hair go gray early though, Nami said, making the others nod sagely in agreement. Except Robin, but that's because she thinks his antics are funny, Chopper pointed out as he moved over to his captain and was scooped up into his arms without thought as the reindeer nuzzled his captain's neck. Robin is a special sort of crazy. She just hides it easily, Nami said with a snort at Chopper's words. Nami Swan, we are all crazy. We did agree to join him, remember? Sanji asked, looking at Nami, and his voice was deadpan. Ah, the age-old question of who's crazier. The leader who everyone calls crazy or the ones who follow the leader knowing how he is? Such a conundrum that it makes even my brain hurt, although I no longer have one. Yo ho ho ho, Brook laughed again, and more than a few other people were giving him confused and weird looks. Hey, how come there's no music? Luffy asked, blinking up at his grandmother curiously and apparently not caring that his crew called him crazy. Huh? Oven asked, blinking at his nephew and having a sinking feeling that he knew where this was going. Brook, music. Luffy called to the skeleton, who immediately grabbed up his guitar with a laugh. Of course, Captain. The usual? Brooks asked, already starting up the tune and making Luffy laugh and nod, his crewmates letting up a loud cheer at the music that they knew by heart. The older pirates all thought that it was familiar. Yo ho ho, yo ho ho ho, yo ho ho, yo ho ho ho, Brooks started them off like usual. Gather up all of the crew. It's time to ship out Bink's brew. The rest of the Straw Hats immediately began singing with their musician while Big Mom's face lit up. She knew this song too. Her children exchanged looks as they heard the familiar song. They all knew it. Sea wind blows. To where? Who knows? Slowly each of the Charlottes began singing along with their nephew, son and his crew. The waves will be our guide, or across the ocean's tide, rays of sunshine far and wide. Even Big Mom joined in, all of the pirates singing happily as the song brought back memories of different times. All of them happy while the guests looked around stunned and confused, and Morgan snapped plenty of pictures while Strussie seemed amused as she hummed along. My. He's certainly a cheerful thing for being born to the revolutionary dragon and a daughter of a Yonko. Strussie said, smiling slightly as her eyes stayed focused on Straw Hat Luffy, who was now dancing with his crew and mom, dragging various guests and homies and other Charlottes into the giant tea party that was becoming an actual party. I'm interested to see how you and the rest of your crew grow, Straw Hat Luffy.